And stay out, you filthy beggar. Dominic hit the dusty road hard, the shop door slamming behind him. He pushed himself up, brushing grit from his coat. That made it the fourth time this week he had been physically thrown out a Noble-owned shop for daring to come in and offer his salvaged goods. Stupid Noble shopkeepers. It wasn't as if humans had some divine claim to the continent. They just had better weapons and more bodies to throw into an army than most non-human nations. The problem was simple and very personal. Dominic had been born Dragonkin, a demi-human race, more commonly called sorcerers for the innate magic they wielded, a bloodline of natural spellcasters with a trace of magical beast blood in their veins. In his case, that beast was a golden dragon. The bloodline had given him the short, curved golden horns that had slipped into view when his hat tipped, and a shopkeeper had instantly spotted what he was. It had also given him something far rarer, the ability to channel mana from outside sources instead of draining his own internal reserves. As far as he knew, only the dragon princes of his homeland were supposed to have that gift. But his homeland was gone now, raised beneath the boots of the Dago's armies. Dominic had fled to Cygnia, and calling himself a prince of Wavemates these days felt more like a bad joke than a title. Today he was broke, hungry, and a long way from anything that looked like royalty. Giving up on selling his scavenged junk wasn't an option. Maybe one more careful visit to the recyclers would turn something up. If he could avoid the guards, he might pull a few more treasures from the noble trash heaps. Nobles threw away perfectly usable items if they were chipped, scratched, or out of fashion. Swap a watch strap, fix a crystal focus, tighten a gear, and what they called scrap became nearly new. The issue was that none of the uptown dealers wanted to buy from him. He'd regretted coming to this city since the day he arrived, and a week of insults and rejection hadn't improved his opinion. Even sleeping in the forest had been better than this filthy city. But this was where he had to be. Cygnia City was the heart of the royal military, the place where the kingdom's brightest minds and fattest purses gathered. Alone, Dominic was no match for the foreign army that had burned his homeland to ash. Not that he hadn't tried. When the Dago's soldiers came to wipe out his people, dozens of them had fallen to the wild, half-trained spells of a furious dragonkin preteen before the rest of the raiding party broke and ran. He still hadn't been fast enough to save his village. It had been a pointless slaughter, civilians erased for a border no one truly cared about. That had been his home, and Dominic refused to let it go. He was sure that if he climbed high enough and proved himself useful enough, he could one day convince the Cygnian army to push their borders and avenge those deaths 1,000 times over. Even as he thought it, Dominic knew how childish it sounded. He intended to try anyway. All he had to do was survive long enough to reach the royal family's apprentice induction, which should be announced within a month. Well, that and somehow acquire a proper apprentice-grade trade skill stone to prove his worth, then deliver a performance impressive enough that someone actually hired him. Details. Annoying details. A position in the royal palace would give him the right to submit proposals to the military and research corps. If one of his ideas was formally adopted, he could ask for a boon instead of money. Reclaiming a scrap of forest where his village once stood would be nothing to the Cygnian army. As he walked through the streets of Cygnia City, Dominic studied the people around him. Most wore tailored coats, polished boots, and fashionable hats. Some had goggles or gas masks strapped to their faces. Steam-powered and Magitech vehicles rattled past, hissing and coughing black smoke and white steam into the air. He had grown up in a rural border village where magic and alchemy were part of daily life, and he already knew he would never feel at home in these overbuilt technomage cities. Half the locals didn't even bother to power their machines with magic. To cut costs, they used coal or liquid fuel. Why would any intelligent species choose soot and smoke when they could solve most problems with magic? Of course, Dominic knew the answer. He just didn't like it. Most humans were born with no natural affinity for magic. The best they could do was attune to skill gems or Magitech tools, borrowing whatever spell work had been stored inside and then recharging it with mana cores, either ripped from monster corpses or crafted in a lab. Even so, the city still thrummed with enchantment. Skill gems glittered on rings and necklaces. The street lamps overhead flickered like gas flames, but what burned inside them was mana, not oil. "What is wrong with these shopkeepers?" Dominic muttered, leaning back against a grimy brick wall, staring up at the sky. "Who turns down quality goods at a discount? Are they stupid?" The sky offered no answers. Just more airships drifting between the smoggy clouds, balloons swollen with lift gas and propellers beating the air. He was starting to draw looks, a lone young man who wasn't moving in a city where everyone else rushed past with purpose. Dominic tugged his hat down over his short golden horns and pulled his hood up as an extra layer of cover, then merged back into the crowd flowing toward what looked like a large, glass-fronted building. "Welcome to the Cygnia City Conservatory. Do you have a pass? Or would you like a day ticket?" the valet at the door asked. Dominic hesitated. He didn't have the coin for a ticket. He hadn't even realized how badly his hands were shaking from hunger until the valet spoke again. "Shall I call a doctor for you, sir? We get a reduced rate for conservatory guests," the young man offered. Dominic shook his head and forced himself to focus. If he wanted to eat today, he needed a plan, not pity. He read the polished copper name badge on the valet's chest. "My apologies, Mr. Dalton. I'll be fine if I can sit for a moment. Is there somewhere I can rest?" "Yes, young sir. Benches just to your right," Dalton replied smoothly. With Dominic's hood up and his horn-hiding hat in place, the valet hadn't noticed the Dragonkin heritage. If he had, his tone would have been very different. Sorcerers had a reputation in the city, and it wasn't a good one. Trouble. That was the word most people used. Unlike techno-witches, artificers, mages, and wizards, who were human magic users, sorcerers were part magical beast. Their tempers were infamous, and their bodies were more than capable of backing their anger. Dalton did his best to keep his face neutral as he watched Dominic. The stranger seemed a little dazed, but that wasn't unusual for people who spent too long outside in the heat. Personally, Dalton preferred the filtered air inside the conservatory so much that he paid extra to live in a tiny apartment within its walls. He almost reached out to steady Dominic, but the boy had already moved away toward the benches. Despite the heat, Dominic was still wrapped in a long oilcloth coat. It was battered from years of wear, but cut in a fashionable style, with brass cogs on the sleeves and a neat row of rivets along the hood. Even so, having it buttoned all the way up on a day like this looked suffocating. "World Dragon, what have you dragged me into, and why isn't there any food?" Dominic muttered. Watching finely dressed citizens hurry past the tap on his shoulder pulled his attention back from the crowd. "Excuse me, sir. The benches are for paying guests only. If you're not buying a ticket, you'll have to move along," an older security guard said, shooting Dalton a sharp glare for letting a beggar inside. "My apologies. I'll be on my way," Dominic said quietly. He had no intention of starting a scene in a city whose rules he didn't yet understand. His long strides carried him out of the noble district and into busier, noisier streets. The steady ring of metal on metal drew him toward a forge. With luck, he'd find answers here. Blacksmiths always knew where things could be had for a price. You just had to catch them at the right moment. Interrupt them mid-work, and you were liable to get a hammer thrown at your head. Dominic paused outside the smithy to straighten his coat and listen. I'll get it done as fast as I can, but steel and copper are scarce right now," a rough voice said from inside. "You'll have to wait until the next shipment comes in." "Well, hurry it up, or I'll find a smith who can," a deeper voice snapped back. A few seconds later, the speaker stomped out, a large nobleman in a black leather coat with silver and brass decorations trailing near his heels. He climbed into a waiting steam carriage that sat idling in front of the smithy. The vehicle's frame was covered in unfamiliar sigils. Dominic couldn't read them, but he recognized the style. He had grown up surrounded by techno-witches, artificers, and dragonkin. He knew magic when he saw it, even if he didn't know the specific runes. The carriage whistled and rolled into traffic. Dominic felt the pulse of magic feeding its furnace as it went. "I don't suppose you're looking for work, are you, lad?" The raspy voice called from behind him, dragging his attention away from the road. Dominic turned. He had always been fascinated by blacksmith's work, no matter how many times his parents told him that such common trades were beneath a prince. With his home gone, Those old rules felt meaningless. The problem was that he still didn't have a trade skill core. Without one, he couldn't formally start any craft. Trade skill cores were Magitech hearts that bonded to a user when first upgraded, setting them on a particular professional path. Only master-level craftsmen and above could create them. The blacksmith's core was one of the acceptable base options for an apprentice magical engineer, which Dominic hoped to become at the next Cygnia Royal Apprentice Trials. The other options were Archmage and Runemaster, both far harder paths to qualify for. "You look sturdy enough for a dragonkin sorcerer your age," the smith went on. "Don't see many of your kind around here, but I'd know dragon magic anywhere." He paused, then smiled. "How about we make a deal?" Dominic raised a brow despite himself. "You bring me the materials I need, and I'll help you level your trade skills. I'm sure you know a thing or two about bargaining." Dominic actually laughed. Who better to talk about deals than a refugee prince who'd been living off the forest and barter for months? Outside of trading scrap for food, he hadn't made many proper deals in his life. But if he'd grown up in the city instead of a border village, he had a feeling he'd have been drowning in them. Dominic shook his head and couldn't help smiling back at the old smith, who had a thick white beard tucked neatly under a long leather apron to keep it from getting singed. "As much as I'd love to accept, I've got a problem," Dominic said. "I don't even know where to find the materials you need, and the guards opened fire on me the last time I tried scavenging in the city's recycling yard." "A bit scrambled in the head, are you?" the smith snorted. "Heard that happens to the magical types now and then. Don't worry, Pops will set you straight. You're in Cygnia City, capital of Cygnia, east shore of the Dragon Continent." Dominic resisted rolling his eyes at the geography lesson. Still, Pops sounded like he planned to help with the short-term problem of food and money, and working as a smith's helper was the sort of job that could actually pay. "What I need," Pops went on, "is anything made of steel or copper, and I know exactly where you can get it. Every day, hunting parties head into the forest to deal with the goblin infestation outside the city. Now, I wouldn't tell a youngster like you to go out there alone, but with a proper group, even a fighter without skill crystals or enhancement gems will manage. You're a sorcerer, so you've got a bit of beast magic in you. If they cause trouble, just blast the little pests. Goblins are easy work when you've got soldiers beside you." He paused to take a long pull on his ornate silver pipe while Dominic thought it through. "How much would I have to bring you," Dominic asked, "for you to sell me a trade skill core and teach me the basics of smithing?" If Cygnia followed the same rules as other cities, a master smith like Pops would be authorized to create a trade skill core and a skill book. Masters could compress their knowledge into these books to accelerate an apprentice's training and bind a core to them. Once attuned, the core marked you publicly as a real apprentice while slowly unlocking the techniques sealed inside it as you practiced. Pop scratched his beard. "As it happens, I'm in a bit of a hurry myself, so I'll give you a discount. Bring me 10 fists of copper before the 7th afternoon bell, and I'll teach you the basics of the forge." Dominic glanced at the clock on the wall, an intricate brass contraption with exposed gears and a silver-etched face. "Far too fancy for this side of town." The hands pointed to 11:15. Not quite noon. That gave him a little over 7 hours to kill goblins or find some other way to collect a sackful of copper. Not exactly how he'd pictured his afternoon, but it would have to do. With luck, the goblins might also be carrying coin or loot. If he played this right, he could end the day with a skill core, some food, and a real bed. "Where do I find one of these goblin hunting groups?" Dominic asked. "Right outside," Pops said. "See the line of steam carriages? That's the staging area for hunting parties. Go ask if anyone needs a spellcaster. You'll land a spot in no time." The old smith's mood had brightened considerably after striking the deal. There was no shortage of adventurers, mercenaries, and soldiers passing through Cygnia these days, but most of them carted their materials to the uptown district, where the great Magitech shops could pay more. The trade skill core and apprentice smithing book Pops had offered the Dragonkin boy together were worth about 1 silver coin, less than the price of 5 goblin daggers. But it would take about 15 daggers to get the 10 fists of copper he'd asked for. He felt a little guilty about the lopsided bargain, but told himself he'd find a way to balance it. Overusing borrowed power from greater beings was rumored to sometimes scramble a young Demahoman's mind and memory. Pops assumed that was Dominic's problem, when in reality the boy was simply half-starved and suffering from heat. Keeping his coat buttoned to the throat in this weather wasn't helping, but it was the only way to hide the threadbare rags underneath, half falling apart and in desperate need of mending. So Pops made a quiet decision. He'd offer the boy the apprentice's cot in the back of the smithy for a few days, at least until he got his feet under him. If Dominic never did move on, well, Pops could always use a proper apprentice. The Dragonkin looked like he'd be much better with customers than Pops ever was. At the very least, the snobbish nobles would think twice once they saw someone with horns manning the front counter. But first, the boy needed enough strength to actually fight goblins. Pops knew too well what it was like to be hungry. He hadn't always been a respected master, and when he'd first taken over the failing smithy from his father, the townsfolk hadn't exactly welcomed him back. Like Dominic, Pops had been born with a touch of magic, and jealousy mixed with greed made people mean. With a small, gruff smile, Pops handed Dominic a paper bag of fried pretzels he'd bought that morning and turned him toward the door. Dominic, unaware of just how bad the deal really was or how valuable an attuned skill core could become, stepped back out onto the street. A short walk brought him to a wide stone plaza, where he saw dozens of people waiting in tarnished copper-roofed alcoves that shielded them from the sun. He was in the right place. Group leaders called out over the noise, trying to fill their parties and flagging down anyone who looked promising. Apprentice level 3 or higher spellcasters needed. "We got 2 journeyman paladins," one shouted. "Journeyman 8 and up. Leaving in 3 minutes for dire wolves in the North Woods. Any skill set welcome. Strong core team," another bellowed. "Hey, you in a long coat. We're short on casters. Want to join us?" A young voice called from Dominic's left. The boy was staring at the single magic gem hanging from Dominic's neck. It was his minor illusion gem, the only spellstone he possessed. The rest of his power came from his blood. As a scion of the Dragonkin's nearly extinct royal line, Dominic could use Arcane Blast at will, and once per day he could call on Dragon Flame, though it seared his throat every time. Arcane Blast had a secondary effect too. If it killed a target, a portion of the unleashed mana circled back to patch up his injuries. His mother had called it the Dragon's Blessing. Dominic wasn't entirely convinced a blessing that required killing was all that noble, but it kept him alive. The boy waving at him was a head shorter, maybe 14, with decent muscle from training and gear that screamed money. Dominic recognized the glow of a crystal embedded in the sword hilt. Enchanted blades weren't cheap anywhere. "Dominic," he said, stepping closer and offering his hand. "Name's Dominic. Darlise Dovencruen," the boy replied, taking it. "Don't worry. I don't mind hunting with commoners. Hop into the truck bed. We're about to leave." He jerked a thumb at the waiting vehicle. "These are my classmates from the Cygnia Royal Academy. Senior Academy Year 1, Class A," Darlise added as they climbed aboard the steam wagon. "I told them we should hit the Commoner Square first. We don't have any proper spellcasters yet, just paladins and an arcanist." The wagon rattled into motion with a whistle as the driver eased it into traffic. Paladins were warriors bound to a church-issued skill core aligned with holy magic. It let them use minor healing spells and holy effects on top of any combat gems and enhancement devices they carried. The arcanist they mentioned wasn't a natural caster either. Arcanists needed devices to channel spells, and an apprentice that young wasn't going to own many. More likely, the boy was a noble heir with a single expensive combat artifact and big dreams. You could only bind one base skill core in your life. The paladins had already dedicated themselves to their path. With luck, Dominic would gain a blacksmith's core by the end of the day. Cores, gems, and devices all had compatibility rules, and using the wrong combination could stop everything from activating. The blacksmith's core was one of the more flexible options, since smiths handled all kinds of gear. The only things they couldn't safely use were holy and unholy aligned items. "No casters at all?" Dominic asked. "Excuse my ignorance. I'm not from around here, but how does that happen?" "We're from an academic academy, not a combat one," said the boy sitting on Dominic's far side. "We're training for the royal court as clerks and aides, and learning how to manage our noble households. Anyone who wants to be a proper mage or cleric instead of a high noble goes to the church or the arcane academy. The wagon was crowded with boys and girls who all looked around 13 or 14. Their fine clothes and smooth hands told Dominic everything he needed to know. These kids had never seen real combat. He probably should have asked more questions before climbing aboard. So this hunt is some sort of school requirement? Dominic said carefully. In a way, answered a tall blonde girl in enchanted steel chainmail, smirking. Goblins drop mana cores. We can use them to upgrade our trade skills and get ahead of our classmates. We need our trade skill cores at apprentice level 2 to finish the year. A few hunting trips this week and we'll be done, while everyone else is stuck grinding through early practice like peasants. The boy beside her nodded eagerly. I'm training as an inscriptionist. You can't do anything interesting until apprentice level 3. If I don't push my core now, I'll waste the whole next year doing beginner work my tutors already made me memorize. Long ago, it was said the Assembly of Grand Wizards had cast a blessing over the world. The monster blessing rewarded those who killed the creatures that plagued the land. When monsters died, the accumulated mana in their bodies condensed into physical rewards. Sometimes that took strange forms, but most often it became a simple monster core, a dense bead of mana that could be used to power or upgrade skills and enchantments. Dominic felt the change in the road as cobblestone gave way to packed dirt. They were through the city gates. Around him, the students started double-checking their gear with nervous excitement. The driver slid open a small window between the cab and the covered rear and looked in. 2 minutes to the drop-off point, he said. Best get your gear ready, sirs and misses. Most of them were clearly more familiar with dueling instructors than real danger. No scars, no calluses, no hard muscle. Their hands shook with adrenaline. Dominic's had done the same before he dug into Pop's pretzel bag. You look like you've done this before, one boy said, eyeing Dominic's stance and calm movements. But your spell gem's still at level 1. Did you train before your attunement came in? Dominic nodded and lied smoothly. I was training as a guard before I came to the city. It wasn't entirely false. After losing his parents and village, he had roamed the mountains, fighting for survival and searching for survivors. But he'd only gotten the minor illusion gem recently, lifted from a scrapyard, and he'd long since sold every mana core from his earlier kills for food and shelter. The security guards had nearly shot him over that one stolen gem. The girl in chainmail punched the air. Perfect. A guardsman's brat knows how to swing a weapon and stay alive. Unlike you lot. Just wait, Darlise laughed. We're going to wipe those filthy green rats off the map. Somehow, Dominic did not feel reassured. In fact, he was already regretting this entire chain of decisions, from entering the city to climbing into this wagon with noble schoolchildren. We're here, the driver called. Everyone out. Stay sharp. Goblins like to strike as soon as the carriage is out of sight. Thank you, Jeeves. We'll see you this evening at the academy, Darlise answered, puffing himself up. Walking back after a first hunt is an important rite. Yes, Dominic thought as he hopped down and scanned the tree line. They were definitely idiots.
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
All of the students rushed out as soon as the carriage stopped, waving their weapons around like idiots, while Dominic and the girl in the chainmail went last, neither of them with their weapons out. Just stay close to me, so those idiots don't smack you accidentally. My dad is a guard as well. Well, a guard officer. The younger son of a viscount and holder of a baron's peerage himself. The younger girl whispered, Don't worry, I've got your back. Dominic whispered back with a conspiratorial wink. The thought that a girl half his size and years as junior was going to protect him was rather amusing. But she seemed quite confident in herself. The girl might be a Cygnia noble, but she seemed to have more common sense than the rest of these kids put together, and Dominic was beginning to wonder if this trip was officially sanctioned by anyone in charge of the academy. If it was, then surely there should have been at least one proper guard with them. The majority of the students began to run off into the woods, spreading out and not keeping in any sort of formation as soon as the carriage was gone, and Dominic's fears were confirmed. This was just a field trip to them, and they didn't take the goblins seriously at all. Dominic had spent years in the mountains, often foraging for food when villages had simply run him off for being dragonkin. He was no stranger to the dangers of monsters in the wilderness, and he had spent years learning the best way to hide from danger. Only a handful were moving together with him and the guard's daughter and keeping a proper watch for threats. Eyes to the right. "I hear something moving," one of the men in their small group announced. How he could be sure of that was anyone's guess, but the rest of the students were making so much noise that it would be impossible for the goblins not to have heard them if they were even remotely close to this location. The crashing was audible to Dominic only a few seconds later as an injured student ran past them, with two goblins chasing close behind. His armor was damaged, and there were signs of blood on his face. Red human blood, not goblin blood. "Stand and fight, man. You're a warrior. Where's your sword?" The guardsman's daughter shouted, moving in between him and the goblins while Dominic prepared his arcane blast spell. A moment's focus sent a blast of energy that felt a lot like nature magic, with a hint of ancient power flying out from his hands, taking the lead goblin off its feet and leaving the creature nearly dead. The ranger next to him, who was wearing a light leather vest over his school uniform, let loose an arrow into the unfortunate creature, ending its life, while the second one charged around their attempt to block and continued to chase the fleeing warrior. "You idiot, get back here. We can't protect you from that far away," the ranger shouted, but the boy kept screaming and running, slowly losing ground on the goblin, who was not showing any signs of fatigue. Dominic focused again and unleashed another arcane blast into the creature's back, flaying the skin apart and dropping it dead on the ground. Still, the boy didn't stop, and he kept running down the road until he was out of sight. The sight had disheartened a number of the students, who hadn't really considered that they might get injured, and Dominic noticed that they were beginning to slip away into the forest in the direction of the city. They had left town with 20 people, which seemed like enough at first, but now that they were here, only 6 were useful at all, and the others were either running away or wandering solo through the woods, shouting and laughing, not realizing that they were in danger. "Can you get them back here? All that shouting is going to bring goblin patrols down on them, and we don't even know where they are," Dominic asked the small group that was with him. "No, Darlise is a duke's son, and he's the only one the rest of the group will listen to. We're all the children of lesser nobles and knights. He did us all a favor to get permission to leave the academy grounds in the first place. They're not going to listen to anything we say," the ranger boy informed Dominic with a rueful sigh. One of the girls snickered at that, and the boy amended his comment. "Correction, we're almost all children of lower nobles. But nobody ever listens to anything that Eleanor says anyhow, despite her being a lesser princess." Eleanor was a silent figure at the front of their group, as well as one of the student group's 2 paladins, armed with shining plate armor and a sturdy shield paired with a brutal flanged mace. But the boy was right. She was just kind of there, and nobody was asking her to do anything or acknowledging her presence. In fact, with her visor down, Dominic hadn't even realized she was female, much less a princess. He just thought she was another young teen boy. "Eleanor, would you like to take the front line with our other brave warrior? You can stop them from getting to the 2 ranged members, and then..." Dominic paused to see what the magical gems mounted into the clothing of the other 2 were. "And then our scribes can throw rocks at them, or something," he finished. The 2 boys who had gotten the scribe trade skill cores looked back at him in embarrassment. The pair had no magical combat skills, but they did have magical blades and some combat training as the children of nobles. Eleanor smiled back at Dominic and nodded, then moved up to the front of the group. It was a good thing that the goblins were all under 20 kilos, or Dominic would have felt awful about asking the princess to lead the party, even if she was a fully armored paladin. They continued on as a group until they heard more screaming and then an abrupt halt to the screech, which was replaced by a soft, gurgling noise. "Straight ahead. It might not be too late if we can get Princess Eleanor there," Dominic commanded. The group moved up and saw 3 students, 1 boy, and 2 girls on the ground. The boy had his throat slit, while the girls were cowering in terror as the goblins taunted them and slowly moved to encircle them. Eleanor cast her only healing spell on the dying boy as soon as she got in range, and then settled into a fighting stance as the goblins realized that someone was interfering with their fun. Dominic fired off another of his arcane blasts, and the ranger let loose an arrow, each taking down a goblin while the other monsters rushed their frontline defenders. A second arcane blast dropped a goblin, and the 2 scribes ran forward with battle cries to support the girls in front. There's their courage. I knew it was the right call to stay close to the 2 cutest girls in class. The ranger laughed as he continued to fire, pulling arrows out of a leather quiver hung across his back. So that was the reason the boys were so energetic about fighting, despite not pursuing combat-capable trades. They wanted the attention of the girls from their class. Well, they had it now, and the guardsman's daughter even looked a little impressed with them, while Princess Eleanor had the same neutral stance as she had from the moment that they had engaged the goblins. Calm, assured, and experienced, none of which were words that Dominic would normally associate with anyone her age. A particularly agile goblin tossed a crude spear at Dominic, which scraped across the top of his hand and left a deep gouge that burned with whatever toxic filth was on the blade. His next arcane blast tore the creature apart, and the wound quickly began to close, pushing the filth back out of the wound as it did. Now that's some enhancement core that you've got, Sorcerer. Being able to use a healing on kill type item must mean that your ancestor was a brutal sort of creature, though. The ranger commented, clearly impressed by the magic. A dragon of balance, actually, life for life. Dominic explained. That was the way of the world dragon that his lineage was supposed to have come from. Nothing was for free, and even the greatest of gifts often seemed to come with a caveat. For most of his life, Dominic had considered them to be the whims of a bored magical beast, putting conditions on its help for personal amusement. But later, the clerics had explained to him that it was the way of balance. Too much of a good thing would breed arrogance, so the world dragon tempered its gifts to its mixed blood descendants with a cost. He still suspected that was utter nonsense, and that his theory about a boar dragon was the correct one, but he never dared to speak up against the clerics, especially after his parents both fell ill when he was 5, and the clerics were the only ones who could help at all to ease their pain. A foreign sense of amusement entered the back of his mind, and Dominic nearly missed with his next spell. He had never heard of a dragon interacting with any of its descendants before, much less directly intervening in their lives without a request or a dragon scale talisman. But as a royal descendant of the mighty world dragon, it wasn't completely unreasonable to think that the creature had taken an interest in him. Perhaps his notion that the world dragon was simply bored and watching its descendant from afar wasn't so far-fetched after all. The 2 warriors were holding the goblins in place, but they were heavily outnumbered now that the other goblins had heard the sounds of battle, and the 3 students they had come to rescue were no help at all. Get up and fight if you don't want to be desecrated and killed by goblins, the guardsman's daughter shouted at the 2 girls, who were still cowering on the ground in horror. That was the wrong thing to say, as she realized the moment that the girls got to their feet and fled screaming. That was 2 fewer allies for them, and the boy they had rescued was barely stable at the moment. Does he have a healing potion? Get him to drink it. Dominic instructed the ranger, who was closer to the boy. Alex, you need to drink the healing potion. You're not dead, but you need to drink the healing potion. The ranger pleaded. Slowly, the boy started to focus, then took a small red bottle from his pocket and downed the contents in one shot. Dominic sighed at the waste. That looked like a high-grade potion, and there were only kids without any physical enhancement abilities, much less high-ranked ones that would require that much healing to recover. It would heal him for many times his total health instantly. But on the bright side, he was now up on his feet with his blade back in his hand and ready to fight. Thank you, Princess. I don't know what I would have done without you, the boy formally declared, complete with an elaborate bow that dropped him down on one knee. He nearly lost his life for his idiotic gesture, and only Dominic's fast reflexes managed to block the goblin's club, with a dagger before it made contact with the back of his head. Save the formal announcements for when you're not in combat. Royal Protocol, Section 17, Part 6. Dominic informed him instinctively, reciting a line that he had heard many times before. He had many fond memories of day trips around the village, and the guard training grounds were next to the market, where his parents plied their trade as magical item vendors. For him, it was just common sense not to do stupid formal things in battle, but the group of noble children all looked at him strangely. How did you know that? Section 17 is all about the Royal Guard Protocol. Nobody studies that unless they're planning to guard one of the princes or princesses. The freshly recovered boy asked as he attacked the goblin in front of him. Dominic just shrugged and breathed a sigh of relief that the two nations' royal guards used the same set of training manuals, and he hadn't quoted some completely erroneous section of the local royal protocol to these students out of instinct. At least his speech seemed to have gotten the boy moving again, and he was no longer an easy target. His trade skill gem, mounted on his necklace, said that he was a rogue, the base skill core for spies, personal bodyguards, and many similar jobs. So he should be decent in combat, even if the gem was an apprentice one at level 1. He had clearly been training, and his actions were quick and agile. If Dominic had to guess, he had tried to be a frontline fighter in the previous battle and had gotten overrun by the goblins who were more interested in getting to the girls behind him. The same girls who had fled and left him behind the first chance that they got. Dominic fired off another arcane blast, and the ranger looked at him in confusion. How is your mana doing? You can slow down if you need to. Nobody expects a commoner with a level 1 spell gem to be doing constant damage. He reminded Dominic quietly. That was a good question. How was his mana pool doing? The arcane blast didn't use any of his body's stored mana. It just pulled it from around him every time that he activated the spell. That wasn't something that the skill gems could do, though. It was an ability unique to him as a dragonkin, and he didn't want to draw more attention to the fact he was not like them when these noble kids were being so kind. I think I will be fine. It's a blessing thing, he replied, not sure how to explain to someone else without at least somewhat referring to his lineage. Shot after shot, Dominic fired his arcane blast at the goblins, taking them out with precision that was increasing with every kill. They were a trash mob to the skill guards in most villages, and in any case, they normally only held value for the mana core that they would grant. Anyone with a trade skill core, a suitable Magitech item, or a magical lineage, like the Dragonkin Sorcerer, could extract it, or any other loot granted by the Monster Blessing. The extraction was done by touching the body, and then a mana core would appear in the person's Magitech storage item or a pocket that they focused on during the process. The Magitech storage item was preferred, as it would keep the fragile mana core safe until they wanted to use it to barter or to enhance a skill gem. The only time that the physical gem would normally appear in the hands of the extractor was if the Monster Blessing happened to have formed an enhancement or spell gem. Those were much more valuable and could be mounted into clothing or weapons and attuned to the user to gain access to new abilities. If the kill granted an item, it was an entirely different matter. It would appear near the body as a solid object if you didn't have a Magitech storage item. It could only appear somewhere that held a larger volume than its exterior dimensions, so you could be in for a hard time getting your loot home if you didn't bring the right equipment. Dominic had one, inherited from his deceased parents. It wasn't of high quality, but it held great sentimental value to him, and currently held all his worldly possessions. As they fought, the sounds of screaming in combat began to fall further and further behind them. You Dominus, or whatever your name was. Do you hear what I hear? The ranger asked. That your friends have all run away back to the city with the goblins, chasing them? Yes, I hear it. Once they make it to the road, they should be safe. The caravans travel with guards, and they shouldn't have a problem with a few goblins. Dominic agreed. Where does that leave us? The rogue asked. Killing goblins for fun and profit until mid-afternoon, then we can go back to town before it gets dark. Princess Eleanor the Paladin explained. The two scribes didn't seem all that enthusiastic about staying out here that long, and Alex the Rogue was more than a little paranoid after his close brush with death. The number of goblins they were in combat with was increasing by the minute, And now each of their frontline warriors had 3 of them to deal with while Dominic and the ranger fired at the ones who were just coming into view. I'm low on arrows. We need to move so I can recover some more of them. The ranger noted. Alex, can you dart out and grab us some arrows? I will take your place at the front while you run. Dominic suggested. The rogue didn't look happy, but the young man gritted his teeth and rushed out to grab a half-dozen arrows from the closest of the goblins. Here you go, make them count. He informed his classmate, then ducked under the female warrior's blade to stab a goblin in the heart. I had more arrows, but they were with one of the other students, a big barbarian clan warrior who can carry way more than I can. He should have rejoined us by now. The ranger informed them. Could he have run back to the city? The princess asked while wiping goblin blood from the handle of her mace with a filthy rag during a short lull in the fighting. It's possible, but he didn't seem like the sort. The ranger sighed, his dark brown hair falling over his eyes. The forest was beginning to fall silent as the goblin horde fell under their blades and Dominic's spells, while even the pair of scribes were putting on an excellent show for the princess and the guard's daughter, despite the fact that they had no magical combat skills at all. Keep moving through the bodies. Collect the arrows where you can. We will need them to get back home. Princess Eleanor instructed the group, falling back on her years of childhood training to command soldiers and run a household as a minor princess. Dominic was learning a lot about how to successfully interact with others in a group from her style. There I see footprints in the mud, someone large, 6 smaller footsteps, and far too many goblins. There is blood on the ground, but they're moving fairly well as they fight. The ranger explained, pointing at the ground off to one side. They're also headed for the city. I think we're the last ones still out here. The rogue agreed. They followed the tracks for a few meters when they saw the first signs that they were headed the right way. 1 dead student in arcanist robes and a large number of dead goblins. They didn't need tracking skills to tell them that the group had gotten surrounded here and had a brutal fight, likely at the same time that their own group was going to rescue the rogue. Crap, he was an earl's son. I don't know how we're going to explain all this to not only the academy, but the students' parents. The way things went down today, it's unlikely that he will be the only one who didn't make it back. One of the scribes muttered. You don't seem all that concerned. Princess Eleanor remarked, looking at Dominic. Well, for one, I'm the group's pickup member. I met you all for the first time at the staging lot. It's tragic that the group lost members, but there was nothing we could have done. We saved who we could, and there is no shame in that. Plus, I'm not from the academy. I'm not going to get detention or even a reprimand for this fiasco, and I have no parents for them to contact. Dominic reminded them. Despite his deceptively youthful face, he was older than all of them by about 4 years. How fast you matured depended on your lineage. Most sorcerers would mature much faster than humans, but not dragonkin. Dragons often took a century to reach the stage they would call young adult. So, dragonkin matured and aged much more slowly as well. The princess might have been under the impression that he was younger because he was still using a level 1 spell gem, but for people in his economic situation, it wasn't that uncommon to never have the funds or chance to upgrade more than your trade skill. If the princess were a regular student, studying in a regular academy, the chance to gain levels on her secondary gems would have only come after she graduated. Dominic could only hope that things were the same here, but the way that others had accepted his apparent skill level when they met suggested that a slow advancement as a teenager wasn't unheard of, even for the nobles. Can we at least bring the body back? It's customary for the families to hold a full funeral rite for noble children. One of the scribes suggested. That's an excellent idea. Who wants to cut a pair of long branches? Dominic asked. Why branches? The scribe asked. Eleanor snorted in amusement. Well, you're not going to physically carry Jeff's body, are you? Tie his cloak around 2 long sticks, and you could drag him behind you. Hasn't everyone seen the medics carrying the wounded before? The scribe face-bombed as he realized that he had missed something obvious, then frowned as he realized he'd just volunteered to be the litter-bearer. But he couldn't ask one of the girls to do it. It would be an insult to his dignity as a nobleman, and the 2 scribes were well aware that they were the worst combatants among the remaining students. He quickly got to work, looking for long branches while the rogue and ranger scanned the area for threats. Hey, good luck, cousin. I found your arrows here next to a damaged bough. No sign of blood, though, so I think that it just took a blade to the bowstring. The rogue whisper shouted from a few dozen meters away. Finally, some good news. There have to be 100 arrows there still. They had barely gotten started when they lost the use of their bowmen. But that means they were down a ranged fighter right from the start, and they might be in trouble if there are a lot of goblins headed their way. We had 2 strong ranged members, and they were without both the Arcanist devices and the other ranger. They would have had to fight everything up close unless they had another ranged fighter with them. Do we even have one in the class? I don't think so, but they have the other paladin with them. I can sense the use of healing magic on the body, and we didn't bring a cleric. Eleanor replied, "Let's just get out of here. I get the feeling that we aren't alone." The rogue muttered, and Dominic couldn't agree more. Once the litter was made and the young student's body safely secured, they began to make their way back to the city as quickly as possible, given their group size and the extra burden they were carrying. The tracks that they were following weren't headed for the road, which would bring them closer to a chance to be rescued. They were headed straight back for the city walls. It was more direct, but the only real reason to do that was if you were afraid of luring something dangerous to the road. Going through the forest was shorter, but not in any way faster. We are getting closer. The grass here is still working to spring up after being stepped on. I would say that they're no more than 5 minutes ahead of us now. If we shouted, they would probably hear us. The ranger whispered. Dominic sighed. Or if they shouted, we would hear them, which means they're likely not in combat anymore. If they were, we would be able to hear it by now. Can we pick up any more speed? It would be best to catch up with them before anything happens to either group. There is safety in numbers, and of the students who didn't run to the road, there are still 2 separate groups of us. The scribes nodded and shouldered the litter between them, so they could move faster through the woods than dragging it would allow. Eleanor looked around the group to be sure they were all prepared, then gestured forward with her mace. Alex, take the sorcerer and watch our backs. Everyone else, I want at least a jog until we have the others in sight. The young princess ordered. The order did make some sense. They were the 2 most agile out of the group, and the rogue could defend Dominic if anything got close, while he was their only ranged member who could reliably attack without stopping. Using a bow accurately while on the run took a lot of skill, so the ranger wasn't a good choice for fast-moving combat at this age. But the thought of being the first line of defense against an attack and not having any more armor on in the threadbare outfit that was under his long coat was still unnerving. In the villages, he had always been able to count on having a guard somewhere nearby if he had to venture out of the walls to do errands or day labor on the farms. And they came fully equipped, not in worn leather pants and a tunic that he had salvaged from Charity Drive. It was made of durable cotton, but it was not much better than wearing nothing if he got attacked. The pair kept a careful watch for any sign of the goblins as they jogged along behind the group, but there was nothing to be seen other than the trees and their own footsteps turning up the soft dirt of the forest floor. If anything was following them, it wouldn't have a hard time of it, and it would know that they were running, as the footprints were distinct even to Dominic's untrained eye. I hear battle up ahead. Princess Eleanor shouted, picking up the pace until the pair of scribes carrying the dead mage's body began to fall behind. Dominic did his best not to give any sign of annoyance that a full-out run for these young students was little more than a jog, even for a young man like him. They were getting there as fast as they could, and they had already proven that they were willing to fight for their lives when needed. The sounds of shouting and horse hooves grew louder by the second, until they burst into the open fields around the city walls, where a large training exercise was going on. There were over 100 soldiers and Royal Guard candidates gathered around a half-dozen terrified students and one muscular young barbarian noble with blood all over his leather armor. False alarm. It's the royal training grounds outside the walls. Somehow, we ended up on the other side of the city. The princess sighed. They had been following the tracks of the other group, though, so they should all be here somewhere and hopefully rescued without any further casualties. Princess, it is good to see you safe. Your classmates told us that an outing to gain experience went horribly wrong, and they weren't sure that any others had survived. A guard captain announced, as he rode over to where they were catching their breath near the treeline. I believe that most of them escaped with minor injuries at worst, though there might have been other losses that we didn't see. We personally watched most of them run for the road, but we were engaged with a group of goblins while we helped rescue Alex, who had been injured while providing cover for other classmates. Eleanor explained. Let me guess, the Nala twins? I told you those girls would be the death of you, but I didn't mean for you to take that literally. The captain laughed while their rogue blushed. All right, let's get this unfortunate one cleaned up, and I will send for his parents. The Royal Guard will deploy another team from here since I have your tracks to follow, and there's a guard detachment headed out from the main gates as well to make sure that all the noble children who manage to wheedle their way out of the academy for the day are safe. I don't recognize this one, though. Who might you be? The captain was clearly looking at him, so Dominic straightened his back and gave him a polite fist-to-chest salute, suitable for the man's status as a knight. My name is Dominic, and I am new to the city. I needed a bit of coin, and I was hoping to get it off the goblins, so I went with the students when we met at the staging grounds. He explained, and here I thought they had the good sense to bring a senior with them on their trip. No offense. It looks like you did all right, though. I don't see any wounds on you, and you aren't showing any signs of mana exhaustion. The captain's look held a fair bit of approval, and Dominic did his best not to give in to the temptation to brag about his skills. A team of royal guards came up and surrounded the princess, separating her from the group, while another team was headed for the Treeline, accompanied by a group of dogs and one man in a strange outfit with 4 layers of glowing goggles on his helmet. The fashion here in the city was strange, to say the least, all in dull browns and blacks with a thing for using gears as decorations. But no matter what it looked like to his more flashy sensibilities, they did still have the skills to blend magic with technology to accomplish what they needed to. On the city wall above the training ground, a slender figure in elaborately engraved armor bearing the insignia of the royal family turned away from the scene. Her sister was back safely, and she had many questions that needed answers. I have arranged a coach to take these ones back to the academy, and the princess will be headed home. Do you need a ride anywhere, young man? I can call you a cab. The captain offered. Dominic wasn't sure how much a cab would cost to get across town again, but he really couldn't spare anything right now. According to his storage cube, the Magitech item inherited from his parents, which exploited the laws of space and nature to collect items from dead monsters and store much more than should be possible. He had 24 copper coins to his name, all of which were gained from the goblins, and that needed to get him some food and a place to sleep after he traded the copper daggers that the goblins dropped into his storage to the blacksmith. If he had been thinking, he should have checked the Arcanist's body to see if his companions had looted his corpse. He might have had something good on him when he died. He was rich, his family wouldn't miss a few little things. Not all of the goblins gave him a copper dagger, some dropped broken spears, and one had given us a piece of tanned leather, but it was enough to fill the smith's order. With a final wave to the guard captain, Dominic headed back into town and started walking. The air in the industrial area of the city was unpleasant, to say the least, and he wished he had a bit of cloth to make a proper mask. But after only a few blocks, he saw a transit stand with an odd bus waiting at it. The vehicle had some sort of external piston drive, like a steam locomotive, but it was powered directly by magical crystals with a mage at the helm. The crew drawing on the stop said that it went all the way across town for a copper coin, so Dominic hopped up into the exposed rear seating area and dropped his money in the jar. We will be off in 1 minute, sir. Schedules to keep and all. The driver informed his with a smile, then returned to watching the clock on the dashboard. The device gave a distinct ring, and the driver slammed the controls forward, violently throwing the large vehicle into motion and totally ignoring the people running toward it. 2 of them grabbed the handrails and hopped on, while the others stopped chasing and walked back to the station to catch the next one, a sight that made Dominic wonder if this was a normal situation for the bus. By the driver's attitude, he suspected that the schedule was more important to him than if anyone was even on the bus at all. The first rider hopped off a few blocks later, not a stop. He just picked a spot when they were close to the shoulder and hopped off. That was the same way that the next 2 passengers got on as well, with one not bothering to come up and pay, just hanging off the rear bumper until his stop came a few blocks later. The driver didn't mind. He just kept up his pace, and the passengers got on and off at their leisure, waiting for safe moments in the slow-moving afternoon traffic to jump down to the sidewalk. Thanks for the ride. Dominic called as he hopped over the side in front of the blacksmith, while the driver laughed. "The stop's in one more block if you need to catch another ride." He called back as the transport rounded the corner to the meeting area for departing groups and slid to a stop with the brakes locked up. It was probably safer to get off early. "Master Smith? Pops, are you in?" Dominic called over the clanging of a hammer on an anvil coming from the back room. "Come on back. Did you get the copper that I need?" The stout dwarven blacksmith called out from the back of the smithy shop. "Indeed I did. It was a bit of a mess since I didn't pick the best group to go gobble hunting with, but I still managed to get the job done somehow." He agreed, then took out the stack of filthy copper daggers from his storage cube and placed them in a bin by the smith's workstation. Pops looked over the pile of filthy weapons and nodded happily. "That will melt down to more than enough. I hope that you haven't used the cores you got yet. You'll need them to start learning blacksmithing." Dominic wasn't sure how many he had gotten, but he checked the items in his inventory cube, scanning past the trash, items under repair, and broken Magitech weapons. 18 level 1 cores. He replied with a smile. As he remembered it, a level 1 mana core granted up to 10 points toward a chosen gem, core, or Magitech item. The points weren't really a measured thing, but a convention used to measure how much progress it would cause at various enhancement levels without all the complicated math. That would be spells, combat skills, and trade skills. It was quite the boon, much more valuable to him than anything else he had gained today. They were also tradable items, unlike the spell gems, which were only tradable before they were upgraded. But they were also consumables and in very limited quantities, so the market value of mana cores was quite high. He needed 300 points to take a skill from level 1 to level 2, according to the classroom lessons on spell gems and Magitech items his mother had insisted on teaching when he was young. 18 goblin kills of your own? I would say that was a pretty impressive day for you, lad. I can't imagine that the students would have traded you theirs. Those cores are quite costly on the open market. Pops mumbled as he washed the copper daggers in a sink full of something that bubbled and hissed when the weapons entered. The acid bath is the best way to get rid of goblin filth. Now we're ready to start slagging them down. Watch close, lad. It will help your smithing skills. Dominic laughed. "I don't have any smithing skills yet, remember?" Right, the trade skill core in the training book. Here you go. Use that, and then watch me work." Dominic wasn't quite sure what the smith meant by use, but when he held the core in one hand and the book in the other, a notification appeared on the cover. "Attuned to trade skill of smithing, created by Master Dwarven Smith Pops, will improve the user's skill to Apprentice Smith, level 1. Then a string of tiny words appeared on the trade skill core's polished gemstone surface. Skill gained, smithing, Apprentice 1. He finally had a trade skill. Ironically, he didn't yet have the big muscular body to actually suit the smith's trade, but after watching the old man use magic to heat the forge and melt the ingots, Dominic thought that perhaps he might still enjoy this trade just fine. He would be much larger than average eventually, but dragonkin age slowly, and were often mistaken for elves in their younger adult years. If you didn't see their horns, that was. Now that the gem was attuned to him, it would never attune to anyone else, so it was worthless to thieves and could be openly worn to show off your status, assuming that you had a properly sized socket in your clothing or accessories. For the moment, Dominic tossed it into his shirt pocket. The attuned gem wouldn't grant his any benefit from inside his storage cube, and trapped against his chest was good enough for the small sphere to be usable. Pops, as the smith preferred to refer to himself, stood by the forge with the clean copper daggers in a thick crucible made of a stone that wasn't familiar to Dominic. The trade skill gem had called him a dwarven smith, but he was clearly not a dwarf, or at least not entirely a dwarf, as he stood only a few centimeters shorter than Dominic did. "Watch closely, boy. What you need to do is fire up the forge, either with magic or with coal, and then pump air through. It's the combination of burning and airflow that gets it properly hot," he explained as he began to work. "Now magic does the job better than coal, so the copper will be ready in just a minute. If you have to use a conventional forge, it could take a half hour or more. We're going to have to make it molten today, since I need to make a special blend of naval brass to complete this compass that the customer wanted. I've got the zinc and tin. I just needed more copper. It's become difficult to come by here on the lower side of town, since the resellers in the Noble District pay better. Forget I said that part. I don't mind if you keep bringing more copper directly to me. Most of the clothing makers use it for making bronze and brass ornamentation, and it's on most of the magical items that are made by the wizards, so there is no shortage of demand for copper in the city. They even use it in all of the steam vessels, though that's making them increasingly expensive to build and maintain these days. Now, the copper is already liquid, so we add a third as much molten zinc and a tiny splash of melted tin, and there we go. Give it a nice stir and a hit of mana to blend the alloy, then pour it into the mold. Then we dunk it in the water and let it cool for a few minutes before working with it. Dominic looked around as he waited for the metal to cool. He had somewhat expected there to be weapons or fancy armor of some sort, given the smith's age and personality, but it looked like it was almost all common tools and small useful metal items. There were sewing needles, nails, hand tools, some sturdy-looking metal dishware that would be good over a fire, thick cast iron pots and pans. All were very well made, but none of them were fancy, and Pops had said that they were making a compass today, which was usually a very ornate item, more of a decorative accessory if it wasn't going to be hard-mounted to a ship's bridge. The bell rang, signaling that someone had entered the store, and Pops waved his hand in that general direction. "Go take care of that, would you? I need to watch the metal. The prices are on everything, no discounts." There was an odd man wearing a long leather coat over black enameled plate armor with the same style of bronze gears as ornamentation that Dominic's own coat was adorned with. He had a matching leather top hat with round purple lens glasses over his eyes, but a friendly smile for Dominic when he came out to help him. "The old man has a new helper, does he? I need a grappling hook. The target we're looking for is at the top of a cliff." The man explained in a slow, drawling accent. He leaned forward to smile at Dominic, and he noticed that the man had a pistol on either hip and a pair of short swords inside his long coat. An odd combination, but everything about this city was new to him, and common sense appeared to have very little to do with their decision-making processes. "I see one over here. 2 silver pieces each. How many do you need for your group? I'd recommend at least having a spare in case one of your ropes breaks on the way up." The tall man stood with a hand on one hip as if examining the quality of the hook, which appeared to be made of entwined pieces of stainless steel or a similarly shiny metal, which were forged into one piece for the eyelet. "It's so bright. It will give us away instantly. Don't you have one in bronze? It's much more fashionable," he asked. The old dwarf had said he was out of copper, but Dominic knew that they could dull the hook without any real issues. The soldiers he grew up around did it all the time for blades to be used during evening guard rotations. "I could darken the hooks to match your armor. Perhaps give them a bit of pin striping for a small upcharge," he suggested with a wink. "Darken will have to do. I've got to meet my group in 10 minutes, and we forgot to buy one in advance." He sighed, clearly upset that he couldn't get a fashionable bronze accessory. "I will be right back." Pops was silently laughing as Dominic walked in with the 2 grappling hooks, but he had the forge ready and a bucket of oil for quenching hot metal. The oil would give it a durable black finish, and Pop's magic cooled the hooks to room temperature in seconds. "There you go. Only 6 silver coins in total for your custom grappling hooks," Dominic informed the fashionable man with his best smile. "Of course, these are perfect. I'm sure the others will agree. I will see you again, lovely young dragonkin." The man flounced out of the shop, and Pops finally let out the laughter he was holding in. "You're a good one, boy. Got 2 extra silvers out of him to blacken them. I usually do that for free if they don't like the shiny bits." He commended Dominic. "The grappling hooks aren't all that expensive, though, are they? Everything in here looks to be quite reasonably priced, and there aren't any weapons or other high-priced items," Dominic noted. In fact, the hooks were one of the more expensive items compared to the housewares. Only the specialty tools cost more. Nobody makes it this far across town without a weapon. We're too near to the staging area for the coaches heading out to the battlegrounds and wilderness regions. No, what they need are the last-minute essentials, things they forgot to pack, not the things that they carry with them everywhere. So that's what I sell. 100 small transactions instead of one big one," Pops explained. "Now, watch as I flatten this out and start the engraving. That's where this smithing skill comes into play, and I'll show you a trick that only a few know." Pops had the copper laid out in a dozen small ingots, and Dominic wondered just how large this compass was supposed to be. It should just be a box with a carrier liquid and a floating dial under a glass dome. But he didn't see any glass in this shop at all. What we're going to make today is a dimensional compass, not a ship's compass. It will tell you what plane you've gone to and what direction you need to take to get to the one you want. It's a bit of a specialty item, and not many know how to make it. So my customer has been a bit cranky. His sort doesn't often come out to the common quarters to get anything, much less in person. Once he was finished ranting, Pops snorted with derision, making his long white beard fluff up for a moment. Dominic smiled at his version of a pouting face, and instinctively knew that it must be for his benefit. He couldn't see that old man being that emotional about some odd mage. You don't need to know how to make the whole thing, and you would not be able to make it at your skill level anyhow. But what I want you to remember is this. See how you need to lay all the magical materials perfectly on it in the exact pattern? If you get any bit of that wrong, the item is scrap metal, and you'll lose most of the materials. But if you do like this, make a paper cutout that you stick to the copper sheet. You can just paint that crystal paste over the top in the right brushstroke order and call it a day. As long as you don't try to add any extra mana before you touch up all the edges, it's fine. The old man was practically rolling with laughter as he did just what he said, using the template to paint the symbols on the copper sheets until they glowed with magic and the runes engraved themselves into the surface. Now we take our hammer and our chisels and get to work. No hard edges. I use this one here to round them off, then the flat one to make a nice hard bend. Light taps with the hammer. The hot brass is pretty soft. The pieces all interlock like this, all 70 of them, until we end up with this. He had an ornately decorated cube in his hand, slid together with such precision that there were no visible seams. Then he put a bit of magical power into it, and the freshly crafted dimensional compass glowed. A word to the wise. Dimensional mages and demi-humans don't mix well. It's best to stay out of his way, and if he's fool enough to suggest you follow him on a trip, politely decline. If you leave your home world, there is no guarantee that you will end up anywhere but where your ancestors live. You see, if you signed a pact with or descended from an infernal being, you would send your entire party straight to hell, and you'd be the last one to die. Pop's caution is, it's a dragon. A world dragon. Dominic mumbled, unsure what the reaction to the revelation about his obscure and powerful ancestor species would be. Pops chuckled. I'm not sure the others would appreciate the distinction between being eaten by demons and dragons, young sorcerer. Just because he is related to you doesn't mean he will be happy to see a bunch of strangers showing up on his doorstep. I understand. I suppose that I should probably look for a place to stay the night, now that your lesson is over. I didn't get a chance with all that happened today. Dominic sighed, regretting being so broke. If you've got one more of those daggers or 3 copper a night, I've got a room upstairs that you can stay in. I'll even pay you if you want to sweet talk the customers for me during the day. Pops suggested with a wiggle of his bushy eyebrows. I've got a few more of the daggers on me. I'll trade you one for the night, and then we can talk about an ongoing arrangement in the morning. I will warn you, though, I do intend to apply for the Royal Apprenticeships during the next intake. Dominic agreed, then set the dagger on the workbench by the anvil. Perfect. You need to work hard to gain some skills if you're going to succeed. Now, come over here, and I will show you a bit more about the fine points of smithing. We're nearly out of the etching chisels that the scribes and arcanists' swords use to make their runes and the decorative bits and bobs they like so much. They're not too hard, and I've got a template for the metal. Pops began. He already had a number of chisel blanks formed out of iron. They just needed to be worked into the final chisel shapes and given an edge and a handle. You might think that chisels are a waste of time, but they're the easiest edges to do. Do you know where most apprentice smiths at the academies make their tuition fees? They sharpen swords and tools and repair equipment for their team members and classmates. That ability to fix things is the true value of a smith to an adventuring group or an army. Not in making new items all the time, but in keeping the good ones they've got in top shape. Once you gain a few levels and start grouping with the sorts who can afford Magitech weapons, you will understand that a lot of their money goes to just keeping up their gear. If you can do that for them, they'll want to keep you around, even if you don't fight much. Dominic smirked at him. I might not look like much, but I'm no pushover in a battle. But he was also excellent at maintaining and repairing Magitech items. He had been salvaging them from the scrapyards to fix and sell ever since his parents had been killed during the invasion of his homeland, over a decade ago. Pops laughed and shook his head. You're not following me. What I'm saying is, why do all the fighting and the fixing when you could do the fixing and only fight when you felt like it? The kids who want to be adventurers don't learn a working trade. They pick a base skill core that gives them an advantage in combat. They learn their fighting style, and they go to battle and risk their lives. But a smart young smith can have them do the fighting while he does all the side jobs and gets the real experience. I get it. Make the tools, fix the weapons, then find some suckers to go out and use them to get what I need. Only then I will be the one smelting the copper, not the one chasing after a bunch of noblemen's children who fled at the first sight of goblins. Now you're getting it. So, let's show you the first step. How to make the tools. They worked late into the evening that night, making an assortment of chisels, hand tools, and kitchenware that sold well at the shop. By the time they were done, Dominic had made most of the essentials for a camping trip, and he was actually getting some decent experience on the first level of his chosen craft. Apprentice Smithing, Level 1, 190 points. He was over halfway to the second level of smithing, but Dominic was beginning to realize just how basic the trade skill gem he had traded for was. It taught him the very minimum of the basics when he attuned to it. So little that one night in the forge with a competent smith had nearly doubled his knowledge base. There would be a whole journeyman smith's worth of knowledge locked away in the skill core, but at the start, you couldn't access any of it. The room that Pops led him to was a simple place, with only a bed and a small table. The bathroom was down the hall, presumably shared with Pops and whoever else was living above the shop in the small dorm rooms. But at least it had a latch on the door and a thick window that didn't leak. The constant burning of coal for the steam vehicles made the air terrible outside, but inside the bedroom, it seemed to be filtered somehow and much cleaner than it had been either outside or in the forge. The answer lay in a simple device hidden on the far side of the bed, a fan with a filter mounted to the front of it. The filter had clearly caught a lot of filth on the back, but the fan was blowing clean air around the limited space with a gentle breeze, making it much more pleasant in the bedroom. It was a magical device, and presumably ran on mana, but Dominic had no idea if he could even recharge it. He could use spells, but this was dwarven magic, not human or dragon, so it was possible that he wouldn't be able to recharge the device and would have to ask for assistance when it stopped blowing. Assuming he was here that long. But if one day out hunting goblins was enough for a 2-week stay, then he just needed another day to get enough for the week's food. Or he could work the shop and find out what Pops was going to pay him as an apprentice. That might be enough all by itself. The thought of food made his stomach growl, but it was now late at night, and he wasn't going to wander the streets after dark looking for somewhere to eat. He would do that in the morning. Morning that came much too soon, with the shops opening at sunrise and the sound of steam-driven cargo carriages whistling and bouncing down the road with their terrible suspension, waking him from a deep sleep. Dominic wanted to go back to bed, but hunger wasn't going to let him, so he reluctantly got dressed and went to the single bathroom on this floor to freshen up. There were fresh towels and a selection of unused soaps in the shower, all of which smelled of various liquors. Dominic shook his head at Pop's version of scented body products, then chose one that smelled of peppermint schnapps. It had a definite alcoholic note to it, but the peppermint wasn't bad. He made his way downstairs to the smithy, intending to head out to find some food, when a scent of roasting meat reached his nose. Pops had 2 plates out on a workbench and a pot of something boiling over the forge. Take a seat. Breakfast will be just a few more minutes, he instructed. While he talked, Pops dropped a large amount of butter and a mug full of the yellow slurry that Dominic hoped was beaten eggs into a cast-iron skillet, then stirred the pot. Smithing is hungry work, so we eat heavy in the morning and again at lunch, then snack in the evening, or just drink ourselves to sleep, he laughed. The pot turned out to be a thick beef stew, served with scrambled eggs and fresh bread. That bread comes from 2 doors down, by the way. If you need more, just head over there and tell the old woman not to cheat my apprentice. Pops instructed. Will that give me a discount, or will it double the price? Dominic asked in his best serious tone, But the aging blacksmith just laughed at him. With that old woman? Who knows? She likes kids, though, and you're a good 2 centuries younger than she is. 2 centuries? Dominic asked in shock. He had assumed the old woman would be human. That's most people's response, and she will deny it, but she's been an old woman for as long as I've lived here, and I was born in this forge. Pops laughed, making his freshly braided beard dance with a movement of his head. The first customers of the day came in as Dominic was washing his bowl, a group of 5 teenagers in practical leather armor and carrying ornate rifles. No, that wasn't quite right. One of them was in cloth robes and carrying a staff, not a rifle. That must be the group's cleric or spellcaster. What can I help you with this morning? Dominic asked politely. We have need of a very particular sort of tools. I need a 5mm engraving chisel suitable for wood, a fine point auger no more than 1mm thick, and a silver engraving pen. The leader of the group explained. Well, I know we have the chisel and the auger. Those are here and here. Let me see if we've got a silver engraving pen in stock. Dominic replied. The first 2 were tools that they had made last night, but they hadn't worked with any valuable metals. In the storeroom, 3rd shelf, 7th box. Pops called up from the forge. How he heard anything over the noise was anyone's guess, but the tools were right where he said they would be. And here is your silver engraving pen. That one's a bit more expensive than the standard tools. Your total will be 24 silver coins. He explained. Can't you cut us a bit of a deal? The leader asked, while aiming a conspiratorial and entirely too friendly smile at Dominic. That was going to get old fast. If someone was going to treat him like a gullible kid, why couldn't it be some cute guardswoman or a barmaid? He might just let them get away with it. Maybe he should stop shaving and let a beard begin to grow in. No, he hated the scratchy feeling, even if it did make him look closer to his age in human years. For a fine and upstanding gentleman like you, 22 silver and 20 copper, Dominic agreed, and saw him begin to celebrate before realizing that the price hadn't actually changed. He's got your number, Nick. Don't worry, we know how Pops is. The price is the price. Hey, old man, come say hi. The spellcaster called out. I can say hello just as well from back here. Bother my new apprentice, I'm busy. The adventurers laughed and shook their heads, used to his antics. We will see you later. Don't work the boy too hard. You hear? Pops chuckled at the interaction as he watched from the forge. Young Dominic hadn't realized that the innate magical charisma of dragon blood didn't discriminate, and all humans would find themselves drawn to a smiling dragonkin, like they would be drawn to a puppy. The door didn't even have time to close before another customer walked in, looking hurried and somewhat panicked. Are you the one named Dominic? Princess Alexis requests your presence to accompany herself and Princess Eleanor on her hunting group for the day. The man asked the moment that he stepped foot inside the small shop. Well, that was certainly unexpected, but Dominic would have rather not gone out again with the children from the academy, even if the youngest princess was the most competent among them. You might as well get going. That's not the sort of summons that common folk like us can turn down. Your room will be safe and waiting for you, and there will be just as much work tomorrow. Pops chuckled when he saw his hesitation. That wasn't actually the issue. The issue was that yesterday's mission to get copper daggers for Pops had been attempted with the youngest princess and her classmates, who had left them all behind with the goblins. The request might have come through one of her older sisters, but if this group was anything like that last one, Dominic wanted nothing at all to do with it. In fact, he might be safer off on a journey through the plains with that flamboyant playboy of a mage from earlier. I guess I will see you later then, Pops. I will bring back whatever good stuff I can find. Dominic told him with a wink. It would pay for his room and board here at the forge, as well as his continued training. At least he hoped there would be more training and not all standing around the front of the shop with customers. Dominic followed the man outside to where a string of ornate carriages on steam-driven truck chassis, all in matching livery that seemed to get great respect from the bystanders, were sitting and waiting on the side of the road. Soldiers and assistants were coming back out of all the shops along the street bringing goods to their carts, while more mounted soldiers on gear-work mechanical horses stood nearby. Using a mechanical horse when there were so many other transport options seemed a bit silly to Dominic. but there was likely an excellent reason for the choice other than the ability to move between trees more easily than a truck or carriage. This way, young man, the princess has requested you accompany her youngest sister as a personal escort. The butler who had been sent to find Dominic explained as he opened the door to his steam carriage. He could sense that the butler was not happy about the situation, but the man wasn't actively trying to stop it. "Thank you, Lord Butler," Dominic replied with a short bow, and the butler smiled. It wasn't often that anyone remembered that the royal butlers were minor nobles themselves, and not just ranking servants. Such good manners. If only the brats from the academy would learn them and stop teaching the princess's bad habits. He muttered as he closed the door behind Dominic, leaving him alone with the youngest princess of Cygnia. That alone was generally considered to be highly questionable behavior, but Dominic suspected that they weren't nearly as alone as they appeared to be. Someone would be keeping a very close eye on the situation, in case he tried anything, and to protect her reputation. He deliberately avoided the thought that they were simply treating him as a royal servant and not a strange man alone with a princess. "It's good to see you again. I heard from my tutor that you had come here last night, and when we stopped out front, I knew that we just had to bring you along again. My sisters were super eager to hear more about your exploits when I told them about yesterday." Princess Eleanor explained. "This looks like quite the group. What are we going out to do?" Dominic asked, gesturing toward the other vehicles and soldiers lined up outside. "We're going out to hunt the goblins again, but this time with a proper group of soldiers. There are currently 2 noble daughters missing from an attack on a lone carriage, and there is a fear that they might be alive." Eleanor explained. A fear they might be alive. Dominic didn't want to think about what that could mean, but his mind was telling him anyhow. It's best that we do a thorough sweep until they are found then. He agreed. Dominic had often dreamt during his early childhood about a day like this, guarding a princess while riding into battle as magical support behind the guardsmen. These might not be the manor knights of his old hometown, but they were still well-trained soldiers, and he was still the one asked to accompany the princess. Though he was peripherally related to the royal family of his homeland, his branch of the family was so far separated that the manor house run by his oldest uncle was the extent of their holdings and status. So, his ambitions were a bit less restricted than the Cygnian nobles that he had met so far. All that was missing from the childhood dream was the fancy armor and the muscular build that a princess's personal guard should have. That was the life of ultimate luxury, following a pampered royal lady around. At least in the mind of a child, it had been. "Is it just you and the soldiers? Who is leading the expedition?" Dominic asked carefully, not wanting to insult the princess who might be his first new friend in this city. "My 2 older sisters, Alexis and Josephine, are at the head of the group. It took a lot of convincing to get them to agree to let me come along today, since I was put in danger yesterday. I don't think that we will get to do much. The guards have orders not to allow it, but we can try," Eleanor explained. "Are there any other civilians going along? Perhaps they could be a distraction to keep the guard from stopping us from entering combat," Dominic whispered. Eleanor smiled. "There are 10 boys from the senior class at the academy along on the trip. I'm not sure how they will help us, though. They're not going to be willing to let me get into combat, and they're all single noblemen hoping to get their hands on a minor princess to tie their noble houses to the direct royal lineage. But I have faith in you. You will find a way for us to do more than just watch the action." Dominic thought about what they could possibly do. This would be a wasted day if he didn't kill anything for the loot, and he was still incredibly poor. It would be embarrassing to say that outright, though, so he had to find a subtle way to make this trip profitable. What if we pit them against the guards? All team boys love a good competition, right? 10 of them against us, and 8 guards to give the guards a handicap. Whoever does better wins. Then we've limited the number of guards and encouraged them to fight more, which will keep us close to the battle and not at the carriages like a servant guarding a trophy in armor," he suggested. Princess Eleanor nodded in satisfaction with his idea. "All right, I will offer the suggestion as soon as we get there, and it should get the boys worked up enough. They need a good excuse to show off their prowess, and they will jump at the first chance to impress me, guaranteed." Dominic snickered to himself and remembered a phrase his mother used to use. "The gods have blessed men with 2 heads to do their thinking, but only enough blood to operate one of them at a time. As long as they were focused on the chances of marriage when a youngest princess came of age, they wouldn't think too hard about the chances she was setting them up. So, Dominic knew that she could get them to go along with the plan easily enough. The carriages began to move out without any warning, trundling along the street in a cloud of steam and smoke. Dominic pulled the thin curtains over the windows to keep the filth of the coal-burning vehicles in the city out of the carriage and leaned back to enjoy the trip. At least if we do it this way, we will have 8 trained guardsmen with us. They all have suitable skills, right? They're not chosen for decoration. He asked quietly. Not at all. The 8 with us will be my own personal guards assigned by my sisters for the day and not city guards like most of the team. Father would never forgive them if something happened to me while we were out. Eleanor replied, rolling her eyes at their overprotectiveness. Well, you're a princess, just not the helpless and dainty one. Maybe they need a good thump on the backside with your shield, Your Highness. That made the young paladin princess laugh. The chance to thump her big sister with her shield would be a long time coming. They were all nearly a decade older than she was, fully trained and in active service to the crown, not entering their first year of advanced schooling. While Dominic rode in a royal carriage to go hunt goblins, Pops prepared an emergency travel bag for him. He wasn't up on current court politics, but he didn't trust the nobles not to attempt to dispose of a rogue dragonkin prince once they realized he was attracting the attention of the Cygnia royals, who valued magical power and intelligence over lineage. By the time they arrived at the battlefield, even Dominic was feeling protective of the princess. Despite her attempts to be a strong and serious paladin and the fact that Dominic knew she was a capable fighter, Princess Eleanor was a very sweet young girl under her facade. She didn't get to do things with friends very much, and the palace servants wouldn't dare to be so familiar with her. So the chance to bring Dominic along once she realized that they were close to his place of work was too much temptation to resist. She claimed that she wanted to prove her worth in battle so that her sisters wouldn't look down on her, but after only a half hour together, Dominic could tell that she just wanted to make friends, even if they were the guards assigned to her and a random spellcaster she met in the staging area. All right, we're here. Let me make the bet, and you can back me up to get the guards on our side. Princess Eleanor whispered to her new partner in crime for the day. Good luck. Dominic hopped down from the wagon while the guards assisted the paladin behind him. Formulating his plan, Dominic assessed the group of 10 seniors from the academy. They were all wearing a plethora of level 4 and 5 physical enhancement skill gems, and they all had combat-oriented base skills. It would be a tough fight to beat their accomplishments, even with a lot of luck, but Dominic had promised the princess that he would help her, and he really did need the money. Boys, aren't you looking dapper today? Might you be out for a stroll in the park? I thought we were going to kill goblins. The young princess teased as they waited around for orders. Well, now look at that. The princess brought a friend with her. Is he a classmate of hers, Princess? The largest of the men, standing nearly 195 centimeters tall and wide enough that he had to turn to get out of the carriage door, asked. I'm a bit more grown than that. Dominic laughed, waving one particular finger at the students, but out of sight of the princess. How about we make this day a bit more interesting? You're all trying out to be guards, right? Why not prove that you've got what it takes? The 8 of them can take us on as a handicap against the 10 of you, and whoever kills more goblins wins the wager. He offered. And what do we get if we win? The big man asked suggestively, glancing at the princess before turning on Dominic with a cruel smile. How about the winning team gets dinner with the princess? Chaperoned, of course, but a proper sit-down meal to have a good conversation? Dominic offered. That way, if they lost, the boys got a hint of what they wanted, a chance to impress the princess, and if his team won, he got a free dinner. The guards looked shocked at the offer. It was a big event for a lower noble of their status to join a member of the royal family for a formal meal, and the way that Dominic had worded it, the winning team would get the chance. That meant the 8 of them as well. They might be a few years older, but none of the guards assigned to the princess was married, a precaution by her parents and older siblings to help the princess pick a suitable suitor from among the men her family had already vetted. All 18 men answered in unison. If the princess doesn't object, you've got a deal. The guards' equipment had been carefully improved, with the most important of their enhancements being at level 6 and 7, with a level 10 combat gem visible on the sergeant, giving them a distinct magical advantage. Plus, they were all paladins from the same order that the princess had chosen. Going from level 1 to level 2 wasn't bad, but the requirements doubled with every level. So, by level 10, it took a tremendous amount of work to improve a skill gem by another level. Evidently, the order that the day's assigned guards belonged to was a more open-minded one than most, as they had taken the princess as a proper paladin while she was still young and hadn't left her as some token squire with no trade skill core. That alone was a green flag in Dominic's books in favor of the guards. Entirely paladins seemed like a strange group choice to Dominic, but many of the guards carried short bows or spears along with their blades and shields, so they weren't completely lacking in ranged defense, and all of the members of their team, except him, could heal the wounded. The students were a fairly well-rounded group, with a healing dedicated cleric, 2 mages, and 2 archers, along with their melee fighters. They shouldn't have any problems dealing with the goblins that they were expected to face today. The hard part would be finding them. All teams to the ready. We have our orders. Clear the area of goblins and all other monsters. One of the elder princesses shouted above the din of the crowd with a magically amplified voice. "Yes, Your Highness." The crowd shouted back, and then they began to split up to begin their hunt. "Can you run well enough to keep up?" "I know that most spellcasters don't have great stamina," the leader of their team asked. "While it might not be my strongest point, I can run well enough, and I'm agile. I'm also not weighed down by a load of metal plates, so I should be all right." Dominic shrugged. "Good. No offense to the princess and your escort, but we fully intend to win this challenge." The paladins took off at a jog, running in time instinctively after training with each other for so long. Eleanor kept pace behind them while Dominic took up the rear. At first, it was easy, but after a kilometer, he was beginning to hope that they would find goblins very soon. Just up ahead, there is a goblin village right where we scouted it. "Caster Dominic, stay with the princess in the middle of our formation. It's too dangerous to leave you out here in the open while we raid the village," the team leader instructed. That was just what the two of them had been hoping for. The fight would inevitably force the team to surround them, and then, as the guards spread out, the two of them would get a chance to fight. Dominic wouldn't even have to wait, as he had nearly 40 meters of range with Arcane Blast, so he could take the goblins out as he pleased. The damage done by the spell was outstanding for a young caster, far beyond what most mages his age could manage, and he had confidence that he could kill enough goblins to make it worth the trip. The goblins squealed in their guttural language as they saw the approaching mass of polished armor under pure gold tabards, and the paladins broke into a full-out run, forcing Dominic to struggle to keep his position, much less move forward into the center of their formation as they had requested. The front rank slammed into the goblins, and the creatures didn't have a chance. These were trained royal guards, all using heavily enchanted weapons and armor, and well experienced with the task of eliminating small monsters. "Princess, fallen toward the center of our formation. We're going to push forward. Gerald and Tony, you are on the spear duty. Keep the second rank cleared. Everyone, keep the bow stowed until we see a shaman or a lord," their sergeant instructed. Dominic didn't know what a goblin shaman or a goblin lord looked like, but he did know that there were plenty of targets for his arcane blast, and they were going to run right over the corpses for him to loot them. Just a touch of his boot would do, as long as the guards in front didn't get to them first. Dominic took aim at a goblin coming at them from the side and dropped it with an arcane blast, and then picked out another for his wrath. "Go easy on a mana, boy. We will be at a while, and you don't want to run out before things get too hectic." One of the guards warned him. The princess laughed. "We told him the same thing yesterday, but it appears that one of his gems has a blessing, and he doesn't run out of mana if those spells keep killing goblins." That was a good excuse for his seemingly unlimited mana pool, and Dominic did his best to remember it for later. "As long as nothing gets to me, I should be fine," he agreed. It did take energy and focus to keep casting, but that was mental weariness, and would recover much more quickly than mana exhaustion would. The guardsmen in the front ranks lit up their swords with bright white light, some sort of paladin-specific attack skill that Dominic didn't know the name of, and began to hack their way through the goblin village. Dominic looked to his right and saw that there was a thick swarm of goblins coming their way. He had a once-daily dragon flame, which would create a 5-meter cone of fire and would be perfect for that, but he remembered the warning. Don't use up his magic quite yet, because things might get worse later. They were competing against the senior class students, after all, and with a handicap of Dominic and the princess, who were both underleveled compared to either group. So, he began picking the goblins off with Arcane Blast as quickly as he could until they got close enough for the paladins to deal with them. When they did, it became obvious to Dominic just how much the paladins' extra skill and enhancement gem levels counted for. There was a flash of light, and dozens of goblins simply disappeared as if they had never existed, leaving mana cores on the ground, which quickly vanished into someone's storage item as there was no more body left. Push forward through the village. Let's get this finished and find another. No way are those students going to outwork us. The guard sergeant ordered as Dominic took the opportunity to grab most of the mana cores off the ground. The group of paladins pushed forward into the goblin encampment, clearing the last of the monsters from their hovels before a shrill whistle sounded from the edge of town. And suddenly, there were goblins bursting out of every destroyed building and from under every rock. The whole village was built over a network of tunnels, and the majority of the warriors had been hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Shields up, surround the princess. The guards ordered, closing ranks around Eleanor and Dominic. The princess was clearly annoyed by the tactic, but it was their job, and they weren't going to risk her getting hurt. Dominic moved back and forth, looking for openings between thick armored shoulders so that he could get a good shot off at the goblin horde which had surrounded them. They weren't charging. They had taken up rocks and spears, preparing to launch a ranged attack on the group. Charge out. Get them before they attack. The team leader uttered just the words that Princess Eleanor had been hoping to hear. Dominic stayed close to her, keeping the paladin only a few steps away so that nothing could get behind either of them, and continued his barrage of arcane blasts. Eleanor charged straight into combat, leading with her blade, but lacking the glow of magic that the higher-level paladins were using constantly. Dominic's attacks made up for the princess's limited mana pool against these more powerful goblin warriors, even as more and more of them appeared out of the tunnels. Do we pull every goblin in the region to us? Eleanor muttered as she hacked down a particularly muscular specimen of the normally diminutive species. The question answered itself as a group of hobgoblins, the much larger cousins of the goblin species, climbed out of a hole in the ground, revealing their meter-and-a-half-tall bodies behind the lines of goblin warriors and carrying massive clubs, too large for any human Dominic had met to wield. They should all be level 5 and 6 monsters as ranked by the power of the mana core they dropped, giving Dominic hope that the paladins had this under control, but more and more of them were coming up out of the tunnel network. This isn't right. There shouldn't be this many goblins in the entire duchy. Clear the area and retreat. We need to report this to the captain. The team leader ordered. It was a great sentiment, but clearing the goblins wasn't going to be easy. There were simply too many of them for the limited number of guards in their team, and they had to protect the princess, who was currently being eyed like a prize by a pair of hobgoblins. She activated a skill that swept the area in front of her with white light, cutting down a whole row of goblins and giving her a chance to catch her breath, while Dominic killed the first few of the creatures to attempt to come forward to fill the void. Princess, back up, and we will close ranks again. They are too close to use their ranged weapons now. The team leader ordered. The hobgoblins were enraged when the princess and the spellcaster were back behind the lines and began to charge through their smaller kin to get to the paladins. They had waited long enough for their chance to fight, and they weren't going to let the humans keep taunting them. Dominic heard shouting in the distance as the hobgoblins closed the distance, but his focus was on one of the large creatures that had been heavily wounded by a javelin made of light. It was bleeding heavily from its chest, and he saw his chance to get some real rewards. An arcane blast to the chest tore the hobgoblin apart, and it stumbled over its feet as it died, trapping one of the smaller goblins underneath it. That was more than he had expected, as the hobgoblin was easily heavier than most grown men. thanks to its wide and muscular build, and must have gotten some advantage from the difference between their power levels. Arcane Blast was an innate skill due to his lineage, and not a skill gem that could be improved as he spent resources on it. But more importantly, if he could get that Hobgoblin's mana core, he would be able to stack a lot of experience on his blacksmithing trade skill core, and possibly even bump it up a level. With the extra confidence that the Hobgoblin had given him, picking targets became much more important to Dominic. While it was considered rude in most situations to steal kills, that rule was more for warriors fighting together. Plus, they were in a rather desperate situation right now, and the more of the large beasts that died before they reached the front lines, the better off everyone would be. There was another wounded one with an arrow sticking out of its eye, and Dominic aimed for its exposed chest, hoping to finish the beast off. The arcane blast fired off on a perfect trajectory, only to have one of the larger monsters throw a pathetically gaunt and wounded goblin in the path of the spell, killing the tiny creature, but saving the hobgoblin for a few more seconds before another arrow took it through the heart. Dominic aimed his next spell for a wounded goblin warrior with a large copper blade, taking its life and eliminating the last of the visible goblin leadership. The captain of the guard team pushed forward with a few of his men to kick the bodies, collecting the mana cores and items that might have been dropped by the hobgoblins, then tossed a handful of gems to Dominic. "Here, sort through these and take what you need. It's nothing that we can use," he instructed. That was incredibly generous, as those resources could be sold or turned in for rewards from their order, but Dominic couldn't deny that he could and would use anything that he could get his hands on right now. Spell gem. Alarm. Sound an alarm if the set boundary is crossed or the marked door is opened. Spell gem. Mage armor. Creates a minor magical armor, which can be used with or over clothing. Spell gem. Quality kibble. Purifies food and drink from any non-magical poisons, rot, or toxins. Those weren't bad abilities to have gotten from any monster at this threat level, especially the Mage Armor spell gem, which was almost exactly what Dominic needed at the moment. He activated the armor and felt the worn linen outfit under his coat solidify with magical enhancement. But as more of the hobgoblins appeared, Dominic realized that what he really needed was some reliable area damage. One dragon flame. Cone of fire a day was not going to be enough for days like this. One of the hobgoblins made it to the line, swinging its mighty club down at the guard in front of the princess, but Dominic hit it in the face with an arcane blast, and the club dropped wide, smashing into the ground and leaving the creature's throat open to the paladin's counterattack. Dominic was beginning to feel a bit like a one-trick pony, but with a whopping one ranged attack spell, it really wasn't an inaccurate description of his combat ability. At least his one trick was a good one. From what he could tell, a stand-up fair fight was not ever going to be his preferred fighting style, even if he could develop the powerful build that dragonkin sorcerers were famous for. But there were some options, even in a melee like this. The team leader was holding off two hobgoblins at once, while the fighters on either side of him kept the smaller creatures away. He took a brutal hit to his shield, and Dominic saw his chance. Minor illusion made it look like the captain was crippled, with blood running down his arm and side. It wouldn't fool anyone who touched it, but it drove the monsters into a frenzy, even as Princess Eleanor cast a strengthening buff on him. It wouldn't be much of an increase at his level, but she was trapped inside the circle and able to recover her mana more easily than anyone else. The team leader didn't even notice the illusion, but the goblins weren't as smart, and they began to swarm, thinking that he was on the verge of death with so much apparent blood loss. Though he couldn't see the reason why, he did see his opportunity and cast Consecrated Ground, an area attack with a long duration and even longer cooldown to protect the group and damage the goblins around them. The holy light burned the smaller goblins' flesh away, and Dominic aimed once more at the injured hobgoblins, hoping for another easy kill and a new chance at some sweet bonus loot. The sounds of battle were coming from all around them now, and more teams from the subjugation effort were charging into the village where the goblins had gathered. The battle cry of the city guard echoed from all directions, and Dominic smiled. With so many reinforcements, they would only have to hold on for a few more minutes, and the influx of green-skinned monstrosities would be dealt with. He took the blade into his hand to admire it, and looked at the small creatures still trying to overrun the rest of the team. He might as well try out the dagger while he had the chance. With a lifetime of observing and discreetly joining the local guards' training and his determination, even a common gray dagger should be lethal enough in his hands. He hoped. Dominic lunged forward with a straight thrust and found that not only did a dagger feel comfortable in his hand, a result of his faithful practice with them for self-defense, but his agile body made hitting the targets much easier. The blade easily sunk into a goblin's eye and pulled back out before the creature had even realized it was dead. The blade was much easier to work with in these tight confines than his magic was, and he could attack twice as quickly, slicing throats, piercing hearts, and keeping the goblins from overrunning his teammates while the sounds of fierce fighting grew ever closer to his team. Finally, he heard a friendly voice. "Princess Eleanor, it is good to see that you are safe. Sergeant, good work in finding the hiding spot of the goblin attack force. I will be sure to see that you are rewarded when you get back to the palace." The voice of one of the elder princesses greeted them. Dominic saw the team leader's back straighten before he saluted the princess. "Thank you, Your Highness. It is an honor to serve. But tell me, have you seen the senior class students? We had a small bet going with them over who would get more done today." The heavily armored princess laughed at the words, and there was a pause before the team leader began to laugh as well. From inside the encirclement, Dominic couldn't see what was going on, but it seemed that they had won the bet. They looked quite dejected. "What might you have bet them?" "I hope you didn't take advantage to empty the pockets of a group of our loyal nobles," the princess remarked. Her voice was especially authoritative, and Dominic guessed that it was Josephine, but with their visors down and all the flashy bits removed for battle, he couldn't tell most of the paladins and guards apart. That was likely intentional in the matching design, so that enemies were unable to react to individuals' known weaknesses. But it did make life difficult for strangers. Dominic wouldn't even have known it was a princess, and not one of the guard officers had someone not addressed her personally. "Not at all, Your Highness." The wager was that the winning team would get a chance at a fully chaperoned dinner with Her Highness, the youngest princess. The team leader replied. Two deep voices burst into laughter as the other princess came up with her guards. "So that is your taste, is it, little sister? I'm certain that these young paladins will be fine dinner guests once we get them cleaned up. Father won't mind if we chaperone for you, and we can hold the dinner tonight. Bring your dragonkin friend as well, since I'm assuming that he was in on the wager, and we will arrange dinner at the Gorgon Head." Dominic sighed in relief, then froze as he realized that she had addressed him as dragonkin. The royal family of Cygnia wasn't known to be any more fond of the demi-humans than the nobles were, and, as Dominic had heard it, they had refused entry to the refugee nobles from his nation after it was taken. Dominic looked to the guard nearest to him for an explanation, as he had no idea what or where the Gorgon Head was. It's a popular and inside the noble district, next to the clock tower and the Magitech pistol vendor, if you know where those are. The food there is outstanding, but it's almost impossible for regular folk to get a seat without reserving weeks in advance. There's a private room for use by the royal family, so Princess Josephine will likely set us up there. The guard explained. "Do you have a change of clothes?" They have a dress code, and even coming in with a lesser princess, wearing your combat gear might cause issues. The royal guard whispered in response to Dominic's concerned look. Dominic shook his head, but Eleanor smiled. "That's fine. The guard will have packed a spare clothing gem in the wagon. They always do when there are royals going out of the palace. You can have it as a reward for agreeing on such short notice to come with me today. I know you were supposed to be at work and all." Dominic resisted the urge to question what exactly might have been prepared for a trip with the princess. But it might be an item gem with a somewhat generic magical clothing outfit or uniform, and part of the royal carriage's standard equipment. They were rare and exceptionally expensive, but the carriage was prepared for a member of the royal family, and they likely had someone on staff who could just make them as needed. He hadn't seen any such thing since he was a small child. But for a formal dinner with the nobles, he might not have a choice but to wear whatever was provided. Showing up as he was currently dressed was definitely not going to work. He had been thrown out of half the shops in the noble district for his appearance already. Getting banned from the restaurant during his first attempt at a high-class meal was not on his to-do list. The guard closest to Dominic tapped him on the shoulder, and Dominic accepted the small gem that the man offered. Once he had it in his hands, Dominic realized that it wasn't quite as strange of an outfit as he had expected. The outfit was all black with gold embroidery, from what he could see in the gem's miniature display, and didn't look like it was childish or excessively feminine in cut. Given the princess's age, he had feared the very worst about how the spare wardrobe would look. Dominic quickly gave thanks to the creator that it wasn't a dress. The guards would laugh every time they saw him if he wore one of her dresses to dinner, even if some of the noblemen did find such things fashionable. "Princess, might we escort you back to the carriage?" One of the senior class students asked hopefully. His high hopes for the day had dissipated when he realized that their chance to impress the youngest member of the royal family had ended with a resounding defeat, and that the day was being cut short due to the surprising number of goblins they had found in the tunnel network that would need to be properly investigated. "It will be a pleasure, I'm sure," the princess replied, extending her arm to set it on his, while his classmates quietly cheered him on. The carriages had been brought to only a few dozen meters away in preparation to take the royals back to the city, but the young man was over the moon with excitement at the opportunity that it represented, and Dominic hung back while the nobleman took his chance to speak with the princess. Unfortunately for him, all he chose to talk about was money and status, and neither of those things was going to impress her from what Dominic had learned of Eleanor's personality. He was about to follow the princess into the carriage when one of the students stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You're a friend, right? What did Dawn go wrong? I can already tell she wasn't into him." He whispered. Did he really think that a junior princess who put so much effort into becoming a paladin would be in a long talks about money and status? He picked all the wrong topics, Dominic whispered back, then stepped forward to follow the other two princesses and the procession of royal guards back toward the carriages. "We should change before we reach the city limits. The academy will have staff waiting there to welcome me back, and I told them that I was only going to observe and cheer on my sisters." Eleanor informed Dominic with a wink. "Oh, sneaking out to go fight goblins. You rebel, you. But that should be fine, as long as this outfit fits." Dominic agreed, making Princess Eleanor laugh. Then he froze as the words he had just spoken sank in. This was a bad idea. Get his head removed from his shoulders for bringing doubt about the royal family's honor sort of bad idea. He was about to exit the vehicle to change when Eleanor spoke again. "I've never seen a gem-equipped item not fit, so I think you're safe. Don't worry about returning that one either. I was already caught trying to sneak out in it once, so they won't fall for it again." Eleanor equipped a dress of her own, and her armor shimmered out of sight, replaced with the outfit in the gem without a hint of undress. One outfit was simply replaced with another. Dominic followed her lead and found himself in floor-length black robes with long, flowing sleeves and a cloak made of the same black silk, with golden runes all along the edges and a hooded cloak. He looked like the nobleman version of a stereotypical wizard, rather like his own Uncle Dave had in the pictures hung around the manor. His former outfit was in a pile on the floor, so Princess Eleanor must have a magical gem for her armor as well. It only took a second to grab the pile of cloth and toss it into his storage cube. Then Dominic spread his arms to show off his appearance. Wow, that's not what it looks like when a paladin equips it at all. Or perhaps it is because of my status as a princess. You would be able to infiltrate the Magic Academy as a new student, no problem. Dominic considered that. If they all had the same skill cores and an abundance of spell gems available from their parents, what exactly were the noble mages even learning at the academy? More spells? Or was it for trade skills relating to magic? Some of those might actually be useful to him in the future if he had any intention of or ability to go back to school. He didn't think that he would be able to take being stuck in classes with a bunch of kids who were barely teenagers. But if he had to, there might be a way to get some knowledge out of them that would make a trip to the academy worth it. "My sisters are going to be totally fighting over you when we get there. Don't let their friendship fool you. They actually compete over everything." Ooh, maybe one of them will want to claim you as a personal crafter? Then you would always be around the castle. "What trade or combat skill have you taken up anyhow? I never thought to ask before." Eleanor continued. "Blacksmithing. I haven't had much time to really study, but I am an apprentice smith." Dominic explained. "A smith? I totally thought you would have taken up calligraphy or rhinology or something esoteric. Most sorcerers choose something like that so that they can try to craft new spells or fulfill requirements by their patron. Is your bloodline's ancestor a demanding one? Do they still communicate with their offspring with mixed blood at all? Or is that too personal? I don't really get a chance to ask these sorts of questions to many people. Eleanor rambled as the carriage made its way back to town. My draconic lineage doesn't actually affect me at all until I have to interact with other people, and they notice my horns. Dominic shrugged, except in combat, but that part could remain unsaid. Observing was pretty much all that the world dragon whose lineage Dominic's family was sired by supposedly did, as well as granting boons to those who were worthy. What exactly the powerful ancient beast's duty or role was seemed unclear. There was a common belief in his old hometown that it was the world dragon that maintained the monster blessing, but nobody had ever proven that, and the pantheon of gods certainly had influence over it, as they all had their own clerics and favorites. In this part of the world, he had no idea what the consensus was. "Who is your ancestor? Can you say?" the princess asked. "The world dragon," Dominic answered on instinct. "A dragon? That is wonderful. So you're dragon priest by birth?" "No, that should be a dragon warlock, because you don't use healing spells." "How does that even work?" "I've never been allowed around people outside the nobility before, and there aren't a lot of mixed blood nobles." The princess was quite the chatterbox, but it was rather soothing after the stress and adrenaline of the battle. Technically, dragonkin are nobles, or when we still had a nation of our own. But I don't think that we get any sort of official or even unofficial designation here in Cygnia or from our ancestors. We just kind of are what we are. My mother worked as an arcanist, and my father was a technomage, Dominic explained, fondly remembering his early days in the village. Eleanor was lost in his thoughts for a while, then suddenly shot up straight. "Right. Wavemates' region had dragonkin royals before Dagos invaded to claim Kindwind City and bring the region under human control. I remember that from politics class." "Wait, you said world dragon, right? As in the world dragon, not just any dragon." "Yes," Dominic replied tentatively. "Oh my goddess, you really are blessed. I have only met one blessed of the world dragon before, and he is an immortal at the Magic Academy. His luck is supposed to be insane enough that they banned him from the casinos. They even say that he defeated the last demon lord by himself, and that he can create an army of monsters to do his bidding. But what brought you to the city? You're clearly not raised here," she asked, staring intently at his face, as if she could detect any sign of falsehood that way. "The village that I was raised in was near the Cygnia border, up in the hills. It was wiped out in a surprise invasion a few years ago, and I eventually decided that I would build my skills and settle in Cygnia City so that I could join the royal apprenticeship intake. I know it might sound silly, but when you reach journeyman status as a royal craftsman, you're allowed to make a request. I figured that if I could make a name for myself, I could request that the army go and wipe out those scum that took away my home." "But you said that you met a blessed immortal? How did everyone find out that he was an immortal? When did you meet him?" Dominic finished, not wanting to talk too much more on the subject of personal tragedy. "I met him on my 10th birthday when he came to the celebration in the palace. But the demon lord was defeated about 1,500 years ago, I guess. The exact date is a bit blurry because the calendar changed with the change of kingdoms, and they didn't record everything properly. But if you're going to go for the apprentice intake, not only are you going to need to go through as many monster cores as possible to build your trade skill stone, but you're also going to have to leave the city limits and get some real experience on your resume that will make the servants raised by the noble families look like the higher risk option." Dominic couldn't argue with that logic. If you didn't have overwhelming skill and connections for the apprentice intake, you had to have accomplishments. He would ask Pops about it when they got back. The carriage pulled up to the restaurant with a hiss of released steam and the squeal of brakes. "You know, one day, they will update the rest of these things to start using magic instead of coal or wood. The smog out here past the palace is awful, but the commoners would riot if we told them they had to start walking again just to have cleaner air in the noble districts of the cities." Eleanor sighed. "You can only do so much at once. But we should head inside for dinner. I can sense them waiting for us already." Dominic replied with a smile for the normally cheerful princess. He did agree with her, though. If he had to stay in the city, he would definitely prefer that they cut back on the number of coal-burning boilers. Not just the vehicles, but many of the buildings burn coal for steam equipment, heating, and hot water. Dominic checked the runes and the embroidered golden scroll work on the mage robe that he was given, ensuring there was no damage or wrinkling of the thick fabric, and stepped out of the carriage before offering his hand to help the princess down. There was some murmuring among the crowd as they walked into the venue, but it wasn't loud enough for Dominic to pick up on what it was, only the generally shocked mood. They didn't expect us to be here as well. My sisters must have caused quite the scene coming in with a whole unit of the royal guard. Eleanor whispered, while smiling and waving at some of the nobles in the crowd. The whole table stood up to greet the princess as she entered the private dining room, and her sisters came over to give her a hug. Good work out there, little sister. I know that you've tried hard to get the chance to prove yourself. Josephine, the older of the twins, whispered to her before leading Eleanor to her seat. Alexis, the younger of the twin princesses, pulled out a seat between her and her sister's chairs at the other end of the large round table for Dominic, and smirked at the young caster's startled reaction. Then she gave a meaningful look at the paladins in the group and back at the chair. We're trying to set her up with the team leader. The message couldn't be clearer if the princess had shouted it at Dominic, who gently took his seat, nearly forgetting to tuck his robes forward, as he hadn't worn a formal robe more than twice in his entire life. They were kind of comfortable, though. He could see why the mages liked them. The elder princess stepped to her seat, then tucked her long blonde hair out of the way and addressed the group. As agreed, you have the chance for a chaperone dinner with our lovely little sister. But don't expect us to make it too easy on you. That said, we have found an interesting new person to talk to, and we'll be rather busy through the first course. Waitress, the wine, please. Eleanor giggled at her sister's antics. She knew all these people, so it wasn't like she was having dinner with strangers. But the two princesses had already turned away from the crowd to talk to Dominic. Thank you for serving as our foil to anyone attempting to sit with Eleanor. I won't apologize for using you to keep others away, but I can tell that you don't have that sort of intention toward the youngest princess. Josephine began. No, he had no intentions of a romantic sort with the youngest princess. But he quickly realized that every other man on the mission was looking for a royal bride, and the two older princesses had their own arrangements for the journey. I heard that you only just arrived in town. How are you liking it here in Cygnia City? Princess Alexis asked, her long blonde hair falling around her face now that it was out of the chain mail coif of her armor. It is quite an incredible place, I must say. The air is a bit thick for my liking, but not much worse than in the forges. So, you really are an apprentice smith? Will you be applying at the castle and working toward the journeyman's badge then? She asked, with a meaningful look at Dominic's horns. It was clear that she knew something about him already, and had likely looked into his past as much as possible when her younger sister asked for him to accompany them today. Dominic nodded. If you're going to train his smithing, he would certainly want to get it to the standard of a journeyman eventually. He also had many more monster cores on him now, after killing and looting so many goblins, and he could likely advance his skill a second time after using them all up later that night. Perhaps there would be value to upgrading one of the other spell gems as well, but with under a month to the intake exams, he really couldn't spare the cores. Marvelous! We can always use more smiths in town, especially sorcerers with nimble fingers, to set the gears of the magical devices. The crystal shaping and clockwork are beyond most smiths, but the metal craft is beyond most watchmakers and inscriptionists. Making magical items sounded like a very lucrative trade, but Dominic wasn't sure how to get into the market. So far, he hadn't had good experiences in the noble district, where such things were typically sold. As interesting as the creation of magical devices is to a young apprentice, I'm still in my first level of apprentice smithing skill. I have a long way to go before I will be ready to move on to such detailed work. The princess chuckled and took out a dagger from her inventory. She placed the weapon on the table, and Dominic looked it over, noting that it was a crudely hammered steel blade with a poorly set gem. The gem had magic in it, though, so the weapon would be formidable despite its poor quality of construction. What do you think of that dagger? The princess asked. Poorly hammered, The gem is only partially set, and I can see the impurities in the steel from here. It looks functional, but nobody would ever call it a display piece. He shrugged. It was dropped by one of the hobgoblins today. That is the quality standard of the common magical items that an apprentice in the lower levels needs to compete against. I suspect that with an old dwarf as your mentor, you wouldn't turn out something worse than that even now. Dominic looked the weapon over more closely. All the magic was in the stone. It was only the effect of the magical stone that made it a magical item. He wasn't certain of precisely how the magical gems worked, but in his childhood, magical items were ornate things with runes and special materials. Not this crude approximation. Well, perhaps it is possible. I certainly wouldn't do worse on the dagger. I don't know how to make the gems, though. Perhaps I will ask Pops later, once we're done with tomorrow's tools. Dominic agreed. The eldest princess burst into laughter, startling the table. Yes, ask Pops about making magical weapons. Perhaps he will show you when he politely refuses to make them for the royal family. He says his weapons aren't up to royal standards, but we all know he makes the best tools around. Dominic frowned, an expression that scrunched up his face and made Princess Alexis want to tease him just to see it again. Are you that short on weaponsmiths? I thought that this city was full of them, since I've seen forges and artisans everywhere since I arrived. He asked. Artificers, steamsmiths, carriage makers, airship docks, clockmakers, brasswork inscriptionists, and a dozen other specialties that use forges, yes. The whole city specializes in Magitech devices, but only a select few of them make practical weapons. The older princess explained. Magical weapons are much cheaper, thanks to the chance to get them from monsters, and crafted ones are in lower demand than a new part for an aging or damaged Magitech carriage. You see. So, all the graduates learn to become mechanics and factory workers instead of the daily drudgery of a weaponsmith or toolmaker like Pops. The younger twin added, mischief twinkling in her ice-blue eyes. They hadn't even noticed the wine being poured as they were so engrossed in the conversation, and they certainly didn't notice that their odd trio had become the interest of all the serving staff at the restaurant, who wanted to know who the new mage boy was who had captured the royal family's attention. When the first course came out, Dominic realized just how fancy this place was. There was real gold on the trim of all the dishes, actual silverware, and the hostess had mentioned a total of 8 courses. Fortunately, they were all small, so he wouldn't be embarrassing himself by having to decline portions of the meal. But still, the nobles here really went all out. Or perhaps it was because the guards were courting the princess that the older sisters had gone all out at a public restaurant. Not that it was hard to avoid embarrassing himself. Josephine, the elder of the twin princesses, was a boisterous sort and had a wealth of stories about combat actions and the antics of bored princesses in the palace to keep them going, while Alexis filled in the details and made sure that her older sister didn't skip over any of the embarrassing parts. Dominic kept up polite conversation with the 2 older sisters, while the paladins all did their best to impress Princess Eleanor. They had a much better grasp of her personality than the students had, and Eleanor spent the entire meal smiling and laughing. But eventually, everyone was stuffed and half drunk, so it was time to return home for the evening. Gentlemen of the Order, it was a pleasure to have you all dine with us tonight. We will arrange a ride back to the barracks for you, and we wish you luck on your next mission. The oldest princess informed the group of royal guards, who all made a point to say a formal goodbye to the 3 princesses before following the team leader out of the private dining room. Eleanor, you're riding with me, and Alexis will take your friend back to the smithy. Princess Josephine instructed in a dry tone. Of course. It was a lot of fun. I will be sure to look you up the next time I can get leave to head out of town. Eleanor declared, waving her goodbyes to Dominic on the way out under the envious glares of the other patrons. Their attitudes were making Dominic a bit nervous that they would come to make trouble for Pops, but Princess Alexis had no such concerns. Head up, shoulders back. Don't look like you're going to murder them in public. Remember, half of these people have no magical defenses at all. A single flame attack would wipe out half the restaurant. The princess whispered, making Dominic smile. He bent his arm for her to take, and the princess walked out of the posh restaurant at his side like they were on a date, and he wasn't just some random adventurer friend of her little sister's that she met that morning. Once their ride started moving, she started to chuckle quietly. You should have seen their expressions. You see, us twin sisters are the last ones unmarried. Well, the last ones who are of age. Those floozies have been crashing every event that we attend for years now, and they haven't figured out why they don't have a chance. Dominic smirked at her. So, who is the lucky lady? The princess laughed even harder. Oh, that tongue is as sharp as your dagger. But it's not a lovely young lass, but a book that has captured this princess' heart. My father is against it, so I can't announce it in public, but I've been putting off the news as long as I can. Perhaps one day we can spend a quiet evening at the library, if you should manage to make it through the selection. Now, it was Dominic's turn to laugh. The younger twin princess, with her fitness model looks and casual attitude, was actually a bookworm with no interest in romance. That was unexpected. Well, I'm cheering for you. I have heard that fictional characters give the best hugs. Dominic joked. Alexis smiled at some hidden memory. You know, I didn't always prefer books to humans. But being a twin, the number of disgusting offers that my sister and I have gotten from noblemen and noblewomen alike has long since turned me against the idea of ever letting one of those oversexed lechers touch my body. So, she wasn't quite a shut-in, just jaded by the nature of her own existence. It was probably inevitable, given the nature of the princess's existence. But Dominic wouldn't have guessed that they were twins, just going by their personalities and demeanor. When people referred to Josephine as the elder of the two, he had originally thought it to be by months or years, not minutes. They looked very much alike, but so did Princess Eleanor, so the family genes were strong and ran true through all the daughters. The carriage took them directly back to the smithy, and Dominic wondered if there was a way that he could switch back into his adventuring gear when he got close to their destination. A fancy mage robe wouldn't do him any good at work, and the other clothes were his casual wear, as much as the fancy ruffles and silk shirts were the princess's version of casual. It was a pleasure meeting you, young Master Dominic Wavemates. I do hope that we can see you at the Royal Apprentice intake next month. Tell Pops that I'll say hi when it won't cause any misunderstandings. There are still people following us. Princess Alexis informed him with a smile that made Dominic's heart stutter. Got it. Should I get dropped at the end of the block and enter through the alley doors? He asked. That would just leave you alone with them in an alley, and I really don't recommend that. Nobody here will challenge one of the shopkeepers. The group is too tight-knit. Just head in the front doors, and they will realize you're working there and back off. Have a safe trip back to the palace? Or do you need to do some shopping first? Dominic replied with a smirk, expecting that the palace would tightly monitor the reading material stocked in its libraries. A real inconvenience for a literature-obsessed princess. I think I'm a bit short on perfume. I hear that the shop by the guardsmen's tavern has some. She replied very seriously as he opened the door and stepped out. Perhaps she just needed a drink instead. Princess Alexis was rapidly changing Dominic's storybook impression of human princesses and palaces, swooning over news of their husbands' exploits. In fact, he was wondering if the man who spread those stories had ever actually met a human princess. The Dragonkin princesses of Wavemates were known to be even more violent than the princes, so it certainly wasn't about them, either. Dominic didn't waste any time getting inside the shop as the lumbering vehicle made its way down the road. But he did notice that there were no fewer than 5 different people, all wearing clothing with noble house crests on it, watching his every action. Pops, I'm back. Do you need a hand back there, or should I put these boxes of tools out on the shelves? Get the front organized, and then you can come back to help out. It's been a slow day today, so I'm nearly done already. I don't think it will be quiet for long. There's a group of people following me back from the restaurant just now. Princess Alexis gave me a ride on her way to pick up perfume. Dominic replied, remind them that if they're not shopping, they're not customers. It works every time, and we can get a good sale out of them. Pops laughed. Only then did Dominic realize that Princess Alexis referred to him by his full name. Dominic Wavemates, a family name shared by all members of the royal family of the fallen Wavemates nation. Pop's predictions about the potential for profit were uncannily accurate, Dominic decided, as the first 4 of the noble retainers entered the shop, pretending to be customers. Welcome, welcome. I knew when I saw you that you were a discriminating group. We have the finest of gear in the city right here for you to peruse. What can I help you find today? He greeted the group, who smoothly transitioned from investigative mode to pretending they were here on legitimate business. The sudden shift in demeanor nearly made him laugh, but Dominic managed to keep a straight face as he made his way out from behind the counter to pull them into his trap. Do you perhaps have a skilled masseuse on your mistress's staff? We have the finest of silver needles for acupuncture here, made to the most exacting of standards. He suggested. They weren't intended for that purpose. The silver needles were for tailoring damaged, magical clothing, where other metals could interfere with the enchanted cloth. Oh, I see that you have quite a few prepared. I am not an expert in the art, but perhaps the masseuse might like a set. One of the servants agreed. As I said, a truly discerning eye. They're only one small gold coin apiece, but I can offer you a small discount if you purchase a full set of 50. Only 45 small gold coins for the set. Dominic pretended that he didn't notice when the man blanched a little at the price, but the man didn't want to make his mistress seem cheap in front of the others present, and his hand went to the coin pouch at his hip. The others looked around quickly while Dominic boxed up the needles and wrote up an official receipt for his first customer of the afternoon. Were you out gathering materials with the guard today? I couldn't help but notice that you got down from a royal carriage. One of the others asked. Indeed, I was. Then afterwards, Princess Eleanor invited the victors of the day's martial contest for a meal. A fine meal as a reward for fine work, as she said. The youngest princess is truly blessed with her family's signature beauty and generosity. Dominic replied, trying to deflect the topic away from his getting a ride home with the princess' older sister. Indeed, our kingdom has been graced with an entire generation of beautiful souls. The servant agreed, and then gestured to the shelf of tools. Our carpenter requires a new plane. Might you recommend one? Dominic nodded and tried to recall what Pops had told him about the tools. There were 5 different ones, and they all looked very similar, but had different uses. Which one does he need? Or do you know what he is making? He asked hopefully. The servant looked relieved that the question hadn't led into a trap of an overpriced bulk purchase right away, as the last one had. He is our in-house furniture maker, and the rough shaping tools were inherited from his grandfather. My mistress wants to replace one as a birthday gift. Dominic stepped over to the rough shaping tools and took 3 out of place on the table. These are the 3 tools most commonly used for rough shaping. A wedge chisel, a rasp, and an adjustable hand plane. Now, these are fine quality and durable tools, made to last a lifetime, but the materials for a workman's tool that needs constant sharpening and sees hard use aren't the most precious. 30 silver will get you all 3, and for another 10 silvers I can have his name or initials monogrammed on them, to make the gift even more memorable. He suggested. It would take Pops all of 2 minutes to add a name to the tool, so 10 silvers seemed to be a reasonable amount to extort the noble spies for the service. The servant held out his hand and shook Dominic's, then handed over 4 small gold coins, equivalent to the 40 silvers. The carpenter's name is Jack. I don't know as that he has a family name. The servant informed him as Dominic wrote up his receipt. Dominic took the tools to the back, where Pops was silently laughing at the forge so hard that tears were running down his face, leaving streaks in the soot. Dominic gave him a smirk, assuming that the laughter was for his antics with the nosy servants. But when he pointed at the pricing sheet, even Dominic had to laugh a little. Monogrammed names burned into handles, 1 copper a line. Pops took the tools and used a hot poker to burn the name into the handles, then gave them a quick coat of oil varnish, bringing a shine to the handles that usually wasn't necessary for a plain hand tool. The heat of the forge dried it in under a minute, and Dominic brought back the tools to face the impatiently waiting servants. We appreciate your patience. We had to make sure these were worthy of being presented as a gift by your lady. Would you like a gift box? I have one here. He suggested. No, thank you. I have the lady's preferred packaging at the house. The servant replied stiffly as he put the items carefully in a pouch. Did you get a chance to meet the twin princesses? Are they as lovely in person as they are reputed to be? One of the female servants asked as she admired an ornate bronze tool that Dominic recognized as a spell-casting focus for technomagists. You have no idea, even fresh off the battlefield. I doubt any man in the kingdom could hope to measure up beside them. He replied with a wink. Did you learn about anything that they like? Or were they all strong, silent type? Another of the servants asked, getting excited now that Dominic had admitted to having been in close contact with them. Dominic considered his answer for a moment, and then a brilliant answer came to him. They're quite sensitive to scents, it seems. They had mentioned how they disliked the artificial scents of cheap perfumes, and people who just generally smell bad. The younger twin princess is not fond of floral scents, and has a preferred scent of gentleman's cologne that she buys regularly, but I didn't get a chance to ask anything about it. Princess Alexis had actually smelled like sandalwood and leather, most likely from her equipment. But if these people asked, the description would send them on a fruitless hunt for the right product. If these people stalked the princess, they should know where she regularly shopped, and cologne was insanely expensive by any standard. Surely, sending some paying customers the other shopkeeper's way wouldn't hurt anything. The rest of the group made their excuses, and they nearly ran out of the shop, leaving Dominic with a laughing pops. Not bad, boy. Only 2 sales, but you more than doubled the day's revenue. You just might have a talent for this, even if you never set foot in the forge itself. The old dwarf congratulated him as he looked over the shelves for anything that needed to be restocked. Hopefully, whatever perfume shop the princesses purchased their perfumes from does just as well. I believe that the princess was actually headed to the guard tavern, but I suggested that the ones trailing her get new perfumes and colognes that the princess would like from where she shops. The dwarf looked at Dominic, confused. The only scents that dwarves usually wore were from the forge, food, or ale. Perfume is insanely expensive. If her preferred shop actually has their own line, they will make a fortune from the nobles trying to impress the princess. The 5 spies for the noble families weren't the only ones who were interested in the royal carriage dropping off a young man at the smithy, and the front of the shop was much busier than usual, with customers steadily arriving right until the moment that Pops came out and flipped the sign from open to closed. With the last customer of the night gone, they settled down into the comfortable chairs along the wall of the smithy by a small table that was used mostly for planning the next project that Pops wanted to design. The comfortable silence enveloped them, and Dominic took out the dagger that had dropped for him today, carefully placing it on the table so he didn't accidentally poison himself. The princess told me something strange at dinner. These common-grade magical weapons are supposedly as good as what most of the shops are turning out here in town. Are magical weapons that difficult to make? Or does nobody care about them when there's a chance to get weapons free from the monsters? He asked. The old dwarf smiled and picked up the crude weapon. Mostly the second, but the knowledge of making advanced magical weapons is a well-guarded art. You can fumble through trying to create one on your own, but you'll fail dozens or hundreds of times before you get it right, and a master smith control access to almost all the magical weapon and plate armor recipes. So, you see, even if they wanted to, and could turn out a decently made blade, the majority of the city's apprentices couldn't reliably make it a halfway decent magical one. Most don't even know what the materials are to make a proper magical weapon, unless they've got an appropriately knowledgeable master and a well-leveled blacksmith corps. That is, the apprentices of real master blacksmiths get access to some recipes straight from their trade skill core as they level it, and at higher levels they can make magical items with a random effect. But those are uncommon grade and better, so they're beyond the budget of most low-level workers and commoner guards. Of course, there are shortcuts, like the alchemical concoction that the army uses to turn out pseudo-magical weapons. But those hardly count, and nobody would give a smithy credit for items made that way. Dominic frowned as he listened to his explanation. So, even if I wanted to make magical weapons, there are no recipes available? Pops tapped his fingers on the hammer hanging on his belt as he hummed a soft song and stared at his new apprentice. Well, I wouldn't say that there are none at all, but I've never been fond of letting those greedy noblemen think that they can just stomp in here and demand that I work for them. Dominic laughed. The princess said that you had told them that your skills weren't worthy of making weapons for royalty, but I have seen what they were using in battle, and while it was pretty, it wasn't anything special. Pop smiled back at him and nodded. The really good stuff has skill gem level limitations put on it by the crafters. Letting incompetent children run around with your masterpiece would just be insulting to the smiths, so they build the restrictions into their designs. Most of the ones that drop from the monsters are the same way. They will have some sort of restriction on them. Minimum or maximum combined skill gem level is the most common. But for higher grade weapons and blueprints, skill type, species, and even personality requirements are a possibility. Dominic was fairly sure he was joking about that last part, but Pops looked serious behind that bushy beard. Pops looked toward his forge with a wistful smile that said his thoughts were somewhere else and not in the present situation before he snapped his fingers and got to his feet. We got time tonight, so how about I show you how to make a basic magical blade? A step up from the trash they give to the enlisted soldiers, but still a simple one that we can do with just monster cores if you're willing to forego the free experience for your blacksmithing core. A few cores for the chance to learn something new? I will make that deal. He agreed, and the old dwarf smirked at him, spoken like a born warlock. All right, we need one monster core at grade 1 or higher for this most basic of weapons. Then we just need to make a weapon to put the enchantment on, and we're good to go. Pops explained as he headed for the forge. Next to the forge, there was a collection of tool blanks, roughly formed and ready to be made into whatever they ran short on. Pops looked at Dominic and then at the chunks of metal and back at him before he decided on a chunk of steel that weighed about 1 kilogram. This should be about right for someone your size. Come over here, and you can stoke the forge as I work. Watch close. I will show you how to do this right, and then you could try one of your own. Pops wasn't a big talker, and as soon as he explained the basics, he started to forge the chunk of steel into a blade a little longer than Dominic's forearm, a short sword of a long and slender variety that looked like he was making it a double-edged blade. The material didn't seem like it was going to be enough for such a blade, but Pops kept hammering it wider and thinner, which increased Dominic's curiosity about what he was doing. Once it was extruded to twice the width that Dominic would have considered reasonable for a short blade, he slathered it with flux, which looked like the same powdered borax that was used as laundry soap, and Dominic pumped up the heat in the forge as Pops inserted it again and got the thin metal glowing hot. Then, he folded the metal and pounded it flat again while whistling a happy tune. A magical blade isn't a farmer's scythe. We need to cleanse the impurities, and I don't have any weapons grade steel on hand. He explained, then silently went back to work, folding and heating the metal over and over until he was satisfied with the quality. Then he began to shape the blade properly, turning it into the gently curved and narrow blade of a saber. That was not what Dominic thought he was planning to make at all. But as the weapon took shape, Dominic could see that it was a beautiful blade and light enough that even with his lithe build, he would have no problem swinging it. Pops took a piece of flat iron and made a simple handguard to bend over the grip, with a few thumps of his hammer to lock it in place using the hot metal from the butt of the handguard like a rivet. Now, hand over the core, and I will show you the trick to making a basic magical weapon. Pops demanded. Dominic handed him one of the level 5 hobgoblin cores, one of the most precious items he owned, but he wanted the very best from this learning experience. Plus, a good magical blade would be real peace of mind next time he was out of town. He hadn't forgotten the princess reminder that he needed to gain some sort of positive reputation before the intake exams. You had a good day on the field, I see. All right, all that you need to do for a basic weapon is one of two things. You can either carve in a rune for the attribute you want to add, or you can randomize it with an invocation. Save the invocations for the priests, though you might have some luck with them as a sorcerer. Today, we will use the Dwarven Forge rune for speed. He carefully carved a single angular symbol on each side of the blade, and then popped it back in the forge to heat as he crushed the mana core with a mortar and pestle. Once the blade was hot enough for his liking, Pops sprinkled the powdered core over it like he did with the flux, and smiled as the blade surged with magical power. It instantly cooled as the enchantment took effect, and the steel turned faintly silvery, while the hilt went flat black. That's the true sign that you got it right. A properly forged magical item will take on its own coloration, not just the color of the metals you used. He explained with pride, before handing the blade over to Dominic. Now, put that away, and it's your turn. The piece of rough iron that Pops handed Dominic for his second attempt was much smaller, so he assumed that he would be making a dagger for his first attempt. He had made a number of edge tools already, but they had just been shaped out of the blocks that Pops had already brought up to his standard for toolmaking. He hadn't had to try to refine the metals before. and he was overjoyed that Pops didn't want him to try to bring the metals down from or to a workable standard. For times he folded it before the crudely smelted piece of metal was beginning to look decent for use on tools, and then another 6 attempts before it was starting to look like a decent carbon steel, the way that a good knife should. Then he began to work the metal into a simple dirk, with the handle and crossbar integrated as a single piece. That was similar to what Pops had done for the saber, to create the landing to mount the handguard, and Dominic found that once the blade was formed into a simple wedge dirk, that he actually enjoyed hammering the curved shape into the handle's grip, forming ridges so it wouldn't slip out of the hand when it was wet with blood. It was a lesson he learned the first time that he had to help his dad skin an animal for dinner. Where he grew up, most would wrap their handles with wire for that reason, allowing the slippery fluid to flow down from the surface without impeding the user's grip. A round of dimples completed the look, and Dominic was satisfied that he wouldn't be embarrassed to take out this dagger anywhere. Now for the rune. Pops instructed his with a gesture to the diagram he had made on the chalkboard by the forge. Very carefully, Dominic carved the rune on each side of the blade and took out a level 1 goblin core to crush while the blade heated enough for the last step. Pops smirked at Dominic as he carefully crushed the least valuable of his cores for the attempt before taking the dagger back out of the flames and crossing his fingers for luck before sprinkling the dust over the blade. Unnoticed by Dominic, as the item was in his pocket, words appeared on his trade skill core as the enchantment finished. Creation successful. Recipe learned. Blade of swiftness. Skill advanced. Blacksmithing apprentice level 2. Just like the saber, the dagger had turned slightly silvered, with a blackened metal hilt, but it wasn't as shiny and the feeling of magic on the item was weaker. Not shabby at all. It might only be a level 1 dagger of swiftness, but the nobles would pay good money for a dagger that pretty. You have a talent for art and sculpture, apprentice. Pops laughed as he picked up the cooled metal between his fingers to examine it with a critical eye. Dominic sighed in relief and slumped against the bench, exhausted from his work, and only now realizing that he had been at it for hours, and it was nearly midnight. Pops handed the dagger back, and Dominic put it away into his storage cube, satisfied that he had just greatly increased his combat abilities with a single evening's work. Just how much would this sort of weapon sell for? Dominic asked curiously. Usually, a common weapon sells for 100 silvers per magical level, uncommon for 1,000 a level. Anything more precious than that doesn't sell for money. It trades for something else of value. Dominic examined the 2 new weapons using the magic of the trade skill core, and his eyes opened in shock at the descriptions. Dagger of Swiftness, uncommon dagger level 1. Saber of Swiftness, uncommon saber level 5. These 2 weapons were worth much more than the monster cores that he had made them with. And even if he had used more valuable materials for the blades, it would still be a large profit to make them. With that sort of prices, why don't you sell them? The old dwarf shook his head. Once you start selling magic weapons, you can't stop. They'll always come to you for more and more, and they won't stop until they've worked you to the bone without so much as a thank you. It's better that you make your own and let the others hunt for theirs. The same goes for armor, but a spellcaster normally can't use plate, and I don't do leather working. It's not my thing. Is there some sort of book to learn the runes from to do different enchantments? Dominic asked hopefully. Pop's beard wiggled as he laughed. You got expensive tastes, boyo. The Dwarven Forge runes are the secret to our success as Forge Masters. There is no written book. We memorize the entire language and never write it out on anything permanent except on our work, where it will vanish the moment that the enchantment is finished. He was right. There was no sign of the rune that he had written on the dagger, and if anyone else looked at it, they would only see the effect, not the rune that created it. Pops had also erased it from the chalkboard, but after the success, the rune was engraved in Dominic's memory, allowing him to create another blade with the swiftness aspect again in the future. So, learning the whole language is one of the secret requirements for Dwarven Smiths to advance. Is it? I am honored that you have taught me something so precious to you. He replied with a polite bow to his teacher, then straightened quickly as his hair nearly swung into the forge. You're a quick learner, and you made great progress in your smithing. Tomorrow, we will get you a proper welcoming gift made, but for now, go to bed. Pops replied with a smile. A warm bed sounded like a wonderful idea after spending so much time in front of the forge. The heat seemed to have seeped into his bones, and standing away from the fire felt cold. It was easy to see why the old man was known to sleep in the workshop, where it was sweltering hot. Once you were used to it, anywhere else was just uncomfortably cold. The next morning, when Dominic came down for breakfast, there was a small pile of gear in the middle of the floor that he knew hadn't been there the night before. "What's all this? Do you need me to put away while you work?" He called out to Pops, who was in the storage room. "No need. That's all for you. You made it to level 2 apprentice blacksmithing, and it's traditional for your master to gift you your first set of tools when you advance for the first time. Know that after this, you'll need to make your own tools, so take good care of them." The old dwarf called back. There was a collection of chisels, files, and sharpening stones, a small anvil, a stone travel forge stocked with coal, tongs, pokers, a leather roll pouch with pockets for everything, and a short-handled 2-kilogram hammer, much like the one that Pops used, except brand new. "This is beautiful. Thank you," Dominic informed him with a heartfelt smile when he came back into the forge room. "I'm glad you like it. Pack all that away and head out front. We should have morning customers soon, and as a level 2 apprentice, you'll need to take a traveling mission soon. Even if you weren't planning on trying for a job at the palace to make weapons for the lovely ladies of the Royal Guard." Pops explained. Dominic had never heard anything like a travel requirement, so maybe it was just a blacksmith thing. But then, above apprentices were journeymen. Perhaps the name was literal, and you really had to go on a journey before you could advance. But he was only level 2 right now, and his blacksmithing trade skill gem had to reach level 5 before he could move from the apprentice to journeyman ranks. The bell above the door rang, and a pair of adventurers came in looking for a shovel, and then another group for a saw blade. It was the usual rhythm of the morning, just as Pops had warned him. A few last-minute purchases by the adventurers headed out early, and then the farmers and tradesmen would come in an hour or two for tools, after which the morning would get quiet, and they could work. He was just about to head into the back room to join Pops when a stout man in a gaudy purple coat and gold vest came wobbling into the shop, looking somewhat disdainful at his surroundings. "How might I help you this morning, good sir?" Dominic greeted him. "Who are you?" "I'm here to talk to the master smith. Go fetch him," the man demanded. "Master Smith, there is a portly gentleman here to speak with you." Dominic called back into the forge, while pretending that he didn't hear the angry grumbling of the man behind him. Pops came out with his signature dour expression, and the snobbish man actually smiled. "It is good to see you again, Master Smith. I was told that you might be able to help me find an apprentice smith who is qualified for traveling work. My blacksmith quit on me, and there are 22 steam wagons in my caravan, ready to leave for Aramo's village." Pops chuckled and tilted his chin toward Dominic. "That's my apprentice, but I don't know that he's going to work for you after you insulted him. Since when do dwarves take little mixed blood mutts as apprentices? Now, where is your actual apprentice? I need to get these goods underway, and we can't go without a maintenance smith." The man replied. They both just stared at him and waited for the merchant to realize that they were serious. But that never happened, and instead he stomped out in a rage only a few seconds later. The next half hour was quiet except for the ringing of hammers on anvils as the pair worked at making the day's tool orders, and then finally the bell jingled again, marking a new customer. "I'll be up front in a second." "Which order was yours?" Dominic called out, assuming it was one of the farmers or craftsmen there to pick up tools they had ordered yesterday. "Actually, I need to speak to one of the smiths here," a pleasant male voice called back. Dominic came out to greet the customer and found a slender man in a bright gold coat over a black suit with cogwork accessories and a matching top hat. "What can I help you with today? We've got a pretty good stock of equipment for merchants," he suggested. "Well, you see, some blithering jackass came to my caravan and stole my blacksmith away with the promise of a huge bonus, so I need a repair worker for my next trip," he replied, while nervously rubbing the back of his neck. Dominic heard Pop's laughter from the back room, and he gave the merchant a sad smile. "I'm afraid that's partially our fault. He was being an ass, so we refused his employment offer and kicked him out of the shop." The merchant smirked. "Serves him right. I'm sure my man will come back once we get to Aramo's village, and he gets his bonus, but I need someone to get us there. You never know when something is going to break, and for that, we need a smith." Pops gestured to Dominic. My apprentice has just reached level 2, and he's ready for his first trip, but this is a toolmaker's forge, not a steamsmith. While he knows his way around the forge, we don't work with steam motors, Magitech drives, or any other sorts of vehicles. The man just shrugged. At this point, any smith will do. I know how the trucks work, but I don't have the skill to fix them in anything resembling a timely manner. I took merchant as my trade skill. I can show him what to fix if it breaks, as long as he has the skill to fix it. That shouldn't be a problem. He can help with the weapons for your guards as well. That is part of the job he excels at. The old dwarf informed him proudly. Really, Dominic took out the dagger he made last night and set it on the counter between them. To someone with a merchant's magical skills for item evaluation, a crafted item's creator was easily discernible, and the man's skepticism turned to shock as he saw that Dominic had indeed been the one to create the weapon. Once he was done examining it, Dominic put the weapon away and waited for his verdict. That is incredible workmanship for an apprentice. All right, I will hire you at the standard rate, 2 gold coins a day, plus materials for any services we need. He agreed. 2 whole gold a day, plus he supplied all the materials? That was almost too good to be true. He suspected that there would be a lot of work to be done, but for that sort of money, he wouldn't argue. After only 2 hours of traveling with his temporary employer, Dominic learned just why the wage was so high for a simple trip down the road. He had been using his newly minted skills to repair blunted weapons and poor attempts at sharpening when the cries of warning had sounded out from the back of the caravan. Goblins in the woods. Send the guards back, they're almost on us. The driver of the last transport wagon in line was shouting. More goblins coming from the flank. The guard beside Dominic's carriage yelled. He was halfway down the convoy, the most protected spot during most ambushes, and equal distance to both ends to distribute the spare ammunition and weapons. All of the guards climbed down from their position by the drivers, while the team members who were skilled with ranged weapons moved to the roof of the armored cargo boxes. There weren't nearly enough of them. Only 3 archers, 1 mage, and a gunner to cover 18 wagons. But the goblins were closing fast. Traveling through the woods, it made sense that they hired more melee fighters. But there were also guns in the blacksmith carriage for times when they could react before the enemy arrived. Those with no combat skills, or even those with a melee skill set, could use the shotguns while relying on their own hand-eye coordination, which was a blessing for the merchant caravans, but against monsters with higher defense, the shotguns became much less effective as the monster hides got tougher. The gunslingers, rangers, and a few other specialties could use skills or spells to enhance the weapons and keep them effective against more powerful enemies. For the first part of the battle, Dominic only had to toss weapons to anyone who lost or broke theirs. But this group was pretty professional, and the chances that someone had a lost or broken weapon they forgot to mention was pretty slim. Spears! The caravan leader shouted, and the guards took out what looked like fence panels made of poles, linked with 1 metal rod, and topped with brutal barbed spearheads. It helped make up for their low numbers, and the first few goblins didn't even have an opportunity to stop before they skidded into the spear lines and were crushed by those behind them. The guards didn't hold on to them. Once the momentum of the goblin charge was stalled, they switched to their usual weapons. Steel meat, goblin flesh, and copper, while Dominic picked his first target. He was about to unleash an arcane blast on the goblins when a sharp whistle caught his attention. The driver was motioning for him to wait and not draw attention to himself. Everyone on the team could and would fight, but they only had 1 blacksmith, and the carriages were almost guaranteed to take damage during the fight. As the number of goblins increased, the drivers took shotguns from their storage items or from under the seats and prepared to defend their livelihood. Smoke filled the air as the guns began to fire, and the closest goblins fell one after another. The defenders were still greatly outnumbered, and Dominic sighed at the lost chance for mana cores and loot, but his carriage was well defended, and his driver had taken a staff out of his inventory instead of a gun. Dominic hadn't noticed before, but the driver of his carriage was a cleric, the caravan's healer. It explained the number of defenders that collected around them, and the way that everyone in the range team kept track of what was happening around their carriage. 1 goblin made it past the guards, and Dominic took it out with an arcane blast, dropping it instantly. One kill was better than sitting and doing nothing, and at the rate the guards were eliminating the goblins, he wouldn't get many more. It all looked like it was going smoothly until there was a loud clang and a hissing noise. A goblin had managed to hide from the guards and attack a carriage, puncturing the steam chamber to immobilize it and buy time for more of its kinsfolk to get there. Blacksmith to position 7. The driver yelled, marking the location of the damaged vehicle. On it, Dominic yelled back as he grabbed some spare metal plates, then the torch and a handful of brazing rods. It would be a quick and dirty repair, but it would be better than letting the water completely drain. He ran across the top of the carriages and up the line to the damaged vehicle, where the driver was dragging the goblin's body out from underneath. He got the return valve with a club. The driver called as he heard the blacksmith land on the roof of the cargo box. "No problem, I've got it." The driver knew his vehicle, and he'd released the pressure after he killed the goblin, saving most of the water and making it possible for Dominic to work as soon as he arrived. The valve wasn't completely knocked off, so Dominic used a block and hammer to knock it straight again, and then sealed the crack with a seam of new brass. "Good to go. Give a moment to cool, and you can pressure it back up," he informed the driver, then spotted another goblin headed toward them, crawling through the grass. He fired another arcane blast while he searched the ground for bodies that weren't actually dead. Everywhere that he saw one still twitching, Dominic attacked, keeping the area around the wagons clear until the fight was over. "Everyone back on board. Let's get gone before their friends arrive," the boss shouted, and Dominic ran back to his ride. The smithy wagon's driver was busy healing the guards, but he looked up when Dominic returned to the mobile forge. "Might as well get that heated now. We've got lots to fix. How bad off is the carriage?" The cleric asked. "Damage valve? I've got it fixed already. No worse than a broken tool handle," he replied. "That's a relief. Those delaying tactics are the worst. It's like every monster in the forest knows when you're broken down," he muttered as he prepared the carriage to get moving again. "Do these attacks happen a lot?" Dominic asked, fearing the worst. "Come to think of it, they've gotten a lot worse these last few months. At first, I thought it was our bad luck, but we've been attacked more than once every trip, and everyone else is complaining about goblins as well. We're not in the mountains where you expect dangerous sorts of monsters, so this many attacks is unusual." As soon as everyone was on board, the steam carriages started moving again, trundling down the rough dirt road and out toward the grasslands and open fields that surrounded their destination. Once they were out of the trees, they should be relatively safe from attack, as the town guard patrols would be able to see and intercept any threats that might be coming their way. Or so Dominic had hoped. Instead, what they found was an ongoing battle between the guards and a much larger band of goblins, along with nearly 24 destroyed carriages. The guards saw the wagon caravan emerge from the road behind the goblin force, picking up speed as the road's quality improved closer to town, and began to frantically wave them forward before the lead steam tractor could try to stop. "Don't stop. Whatever you do, don't stop. Once you're behind the lines, you will be safe," the guard captain yelled as the caravan approached. The team leader shouted back down the line of vehicles as he got the command. "You heard the man. Keep the speed up. Ranged fighters, give it your all. Everyone else, protect the wheels. Don't let them get us bogged down, or we will be stuck in the trees." The first vehicle cleared the tree line a second later, and the gunner on the second carriage began to rain bullets on the goblins. Dominic had never seen a skill like that before, and the gunner hadn't used it during the last battle, but it was magnificent. They fired until their guns were empty, and then reloaded in the blink of an eye, and did it again. That had to be incredibly hard on the gunner's ammunition supply, but it kept the goblins away from the carriages, and the first few trucks were quickly past the melee without incident. The archers and mage were next up to guard the lines, while Dominic unleashed arcane blast on anything that got close enough to the vehicles that he could see it from his position halfway down the line. As his carriage got close to the tree line, where he would be able to see a wider angle, Dominic noticed that there were precious few casters and ranged fighters at the back, only warrior classes with bows as their secondary weapon, and drivers with shotguns. They had been doing a decent job on the front half of the convoy, but they also had the support of stronger range classes who had actual specialty skills to support their attacks. "You don't mind if I move back, do you? The back half is short on casters," Dominic called to his driver from the roof of the smithy carriage. "Why would you do that? I know you're a decent caster, but they can take care of themselves. Trust them." The driver called back. As much as Dominic was tempted to be stubborn, the man had a point. The team leader had set things up this way on purpose, and they hadn't lost anyone since the start of the trip, so it should all be working as intended. The guards had also gotten the goblin swarm a bit more under control during their battle, as the front of the convoy had done so much damage to the nearby enemies that the defenders who had already been in combat were able to regroup and force them away from the road again. If he had been thinking clearly and not caught up in the excitement of actually getting to be part of an adventure story, Dominic should have recognized the strategy. It was one that the knights in his childhood village were well versed in. So, from his spot on the roof, Dominic continued his barrage until the goblins were out of range, and the whole convoy was safely on the cobblestone road that led into Aramo's village. As they bounced down the road, Dominic made note of 3 important facts. The quality of the workmanship on the spring steel made a huge difference in how the various vehicles rode. Secondly, the trucks that were custom-built for cargo were much more stable than the ones which were retrofitted from a horse-drawn carriage template. And third, the guards and merchants were hiding all their good weapons in their storage or in hidden compartments of the carriages if they didn't have a storage item. "What are they doing?" he whispered to the healer who drove the mobile smithy. "Oh yes, this is your first trip. You see, there's an entry tax based on the value of goods that we carry, and we're supposed to show them everything that we've got so they can assess it. Take out your worst gear and pretend that the carriage's tools are all that you have. The boss has already accounted for their value in the trip's fees. The lower we can value our gear, the cheaper it is to get a trade caravan into the village." That seemed incredibly petty for a village that relied on trade goods for their survival. But perhaps that was just the way of the world in Cygnia, Dominic decided as he put his good weapons away and took out a non-magical goblin dagger to slip into the plain leather sheath on his hip. Even the fine traveling cloaks went away, replaced with threadbare, unenchanted versions for the benefit of the guards. Dominic didn't have that luxury. All he had was the leather coat and the work clothes that he arrived in, and he hadn't been working anywhere near long enough for a new leather apron to wear out. "You should at least try to fool them. Don't you have a piece of goblin armor in your inventory?" The healer laughed when he noticed that Dominic hadn't changed his outfit. Dominic swapped his coat out for a hobgoblin shirt that he had in his inventory cube, intended to be washed and used as a shop rag, then shuddered in revulsion as the filthy cloth touched his skin. The healer chuckled and waved his hand in a dismissive gesture. "Better change back. They'll believe that even less than they would a boy in a set of palace initiate's armor, pretending to be a merchant. Maybe put your smithy apron on instead of the coat, and they'll just see a penniless apprentice on his first trip." That was precisely what Dominic was, though. He didn't get paid in advance, so he was still very much a penniless apprentice, but he had a good apron courtesy of Pops, and he changed into that instead of his only leather coat, then swung down into the smithy carriage to wait for their turn in line. As they reached the front of the line and prepared to enter Aramo's village, Dominic heard a pounding on the armored door of his carriage and swung the entry open to greet the guard. As he saw the guard's clothing, rough linen under his guard-issue chainmail, Dominic got a great idea. He had minor illusion available to him, and it wouldn't take much to change the appearance of his leather apron to a cheaper plain leather one, filthy with soot in a way suited to having been in the forge all day. A shimmer passed over him as he altered his clothing, but in the heat haze coming from the door, the guard didn't notice anything at all. Only a few seconds later, when the heat of the forge wagon had dissipated a little, did he look back in the door again to actually inspect Dominic. The man leaned in the door, then stepped back as the wind shifted and a wave of heat from the forge burst out of the entry, but did have time to take note of Dominic's sweaty but smiling face in the entryway. "Move the apron aside, so I can check your weapons," he demanded in a monotone voice that let Dominic know he was just doing his job. He nodded as he looked at the crude hilts of the daggers, and then the plain linen clothes under the brand new, but dirty apron. Must have been a rough day if they brought a fresh green apprentice as their smith, he commented. Dominic chuckled as he remembered the words that the boss had used. Some pompous jackanape offered their usual smith a big bonus to go with him for the trip, so I got the call up at the last minute. Most money I've seen in my life. The guard laughed along with him. I'll bet it is. It's not often that an apprentice sees a whole gold coin, and even more rare that he will earn more than one at a time. I suggest that you ask him to split it into golden pennies or silver coins when you get paid tonight, so that you don't have to hope that the shops have enough change. That is an excellent idea. Thank you, Dominic replied, honestly impressed with the professionalism of the guard, who he noticed carried both a sword and a pistol on his hips. He passed on to the next carriage, and the healer gave Dominic a thumbs up and a sly wink, then lit a cigarette while they waited. He considered saying something about them being bad for his health, but that was the healer. He didn't really have to worry about such a small thing. Once the inspections were finished, the carriages passed through the gates, and the leader directed them down a path that seemed familiar to everyone but Dominic, winding through the streets toward whatever customer had requested their goods today. They eventually found themselves in a smaller version of the gathering square that was across from Pop's Forge in the city, and Dominic noticed that it was set up more like a flea market than a parking lot. Do you just sell everything right here? He asked his driver, confused by the sight in front of them. Some do, but we have a buyer. The problem is that the streets get crowded, since the whole village is filled with tightly packed apartment buildings. So we park here, and the buyers send someone to get it. The big transport vehicles can't make it down the side streets without completely blocking them in both directions. He explained. One by one, the boss handed out the day's pay as he made his way down the row, but he paused just before Dominic's wagon as a man on crutches with visible wounds and bandages on his face hobbled his way to the convoy. Goddess Tom, what in the world happened to you? The boss shouted, then ran over to help the man up into the smithy carriage. The healer followed them in, quickly casting a series of spells on the wounded man, who was slumped in the well-worn bench seat of the carriage like he was home. That idiot and his damnable promise of a big trip bonus is what happened to me. We were running from the goblins, and we had just made the clearing outside town when he ordered that we spread out and fight. Those idiots listened to him, but they didn't have a decent fighter among them, and the goblins had 3 shamans. We didn't have enough ranged fighters to take on the shamans, and the caravan guards were scraped up from the street, mostly academy dropouts who couldn't tell their ass from a tea kettle. They managed to lose to a bunch of ragtag goblins, and they probably would have even without the shaman's help. When the guards showed up to help, I packed my things and moved to the back to keep them supplied with arrows. It cost me my whole stock, but I made it back to town. They didn't have a healer left to deal with the injuries, and the goblins got the convoy leader as well. Turns out, he didn't even have enough on his body to pay the wages. He was betting that he would get enough from the sales to make a profit and pay us out the promised bonuses. The carriages are all trash now, and the goods are mostly ruined, so the survivors couldn't even sell those to make up the difference. Tom explained. The healer patted him on the shoulder and pulled a blanket from under the seat. Go to bed and sleep it off. We can scold you for greed and stupidity in the morning. It's good to have you back. The smith chuckled as he stretched out on the seat, finally noticing Dominic in the carriage, sitting next to the forge. Is that my replacement? Heck, as cute as he is, I'm surprised he didn't kick me out on my ear. He joked. He's a fine spellcaster as well. Picks off goblins like nobody's business, and each spell is a sure kill. If he was a fully trained smith, you might be in trouble. The convoy leader teased his old friend, before handing Dominic his day's wages in silver coin. Oh, where did you find that kind of multi-talented smith? Tom asked. He's Pop's apprentice. Well, that's good luck for me. He will want his apprentice back after the return trip, I suppose. The old man doesn't take to very many people, so if he took an actual apprentice, he won't let his new one go so easily. Dominic laughed as the smith and the boss shared stories of their trip, then realized that it was beginning to get late, and he hadn't made any arrangements for the night. With their usual smith back, he wouldn't be welcome to sleep in the forge carriage, even if it was big enough, so he should start looking for a hotel now that he had his wages. There was an inn nearby, but it was all marble walls, with guards at the doors in fancy armor and high-leveled skill gems. That looked far too expensive for his wallet. Hey, Tom, is there an inn here that I might actually be able to afford? Dominic asked as he made sure he hadn't left anything in the other man's forge. That's the only one in town with an open room. I was going to stay there if your lot got delayed for the night. You're welcome to put up a hammock on the far side if you like, but I will warn you that I snore. But if you can catch her, I think that our gunner, Bella, has a friend here in town, and she will likely be staying over there. You might be able to get a couch with them. The farmers are always happy to have a Rayal Smith stay over for a few hours' work. He suggested. The gunner was still laughing with the ranger up near the front of the convoy as the locals unloaded the cargo. The guard jobs weren't finished until the cargo was unloaded and paid for, while the smith was on duty until the carriages were fixed and good to go again. They were lucky and didn't take much, if any, damage this time, so the boss hadn't requested anything of him after they arrived. He had just paid and left him with Tom, who was nursing his aching bones after being healed of his injuries. Dominic waved goodbye to the smith and hopped down from the oversized carriage with a shiver as he adjusted to the lack of heat from the forge. Bella, was it? I'm Dominic, the smith for the trip. Tom said that you might know a spot that I could rent a bed for a few nights. Somewhere more reasonable than that gaudy inn. Dominic asked as he approached the guards. The gunner pulled her hood back, revealing a mass of ginger-orange curls and an engagement ring on her hand, then smiled at him. A smith and a caster? Yeah, I suppose that I might be able to find a room for you. I might even be able to find a hunting party for you, if you would like to join us on a quest. You see, I've got my gunner skill gem up to level 4 and halfway to level 5, where I will get a pay increase, so I'm looking to head out of town for the week that the caravan is here and try to get some experience in. What do you say you join me and my friend? She asked. Well, I know that you're good, but who is your friend? The ranger you've been flirting with? Dominic asked. Oh no, he's just a good driver. We would make lousy party members. You like Wiz, he's a crusader, so he can double as our group's healer and our main tank. He's already got his holy stone to level 7, so he wouldn't normally go with a pair like us, but he's good-hearted, and the goblins have become a problem for his farm. Bella explained, using hand gestures to emphasize her points. One of the other guards chuckled at her animated response, then smiled at Dominic. Normally, I would caution against 2 kids in love and a half-grown smith going out to fight goblins together, but Wiz doesn't count. That's not a kid. That's a pit bull in a kilt with a face to match. He laughed. Bella smacked him on the arm. Don't let him hear you say that, or he will beat you again. The clock on the nearby hotel chimed 6 o'clock, and the group began to break up their meetings to start cooking dinner. The caravan leader provided the supplies for meals as part of the deal, and technically, they were all still employees for the rest of the day, so Dominic sat down next to Bella and helped her chop potatoes for the evening meal. The stew was simple, but that was normal for traveling groups everywhere that Dominic had passed through since his hometown had been destroyed. Only certain foods traveled well, and it was best to pick the ones that were cheap and plentiful. In this case, cured rabbit, potatoes, and beans that Dominic wasn't certain were going to be soft by the time that the meal was ready. It seemed that the caravan guards knew what they were doing, though, and after half an hour, the beans were splitting as he stirred the stew, and the handful of pre-mixed spices that one of the others had added was smelling delicious. Even Tom managed to make his way out of bed to come for dinner, drawn by the smell of the stew pot as the last of the goods were cleared out of the carriages. Dominic filled himself a bowl and then helped serve the others, dishing out stew as fast as they could hold out their bowls. The pot was huge, and Dominic wondered if the plan was to have leftovers so they didn't need to cook for the next day or two, but as he served, more people started to arrive. There were the warehouse workers who had moved the goods, along with a few downtrodden locals who looked like they could use a good meal. The boss gestured for them to keep serving, right until the pot was empty. The number of happy locals made Dominic realize that he had overlooked one of the most important parts of being a merchant: public relations. If the people didn't like you, it cost more to get unloaded, it got harder to sell your goods, and you didn't get as good a prices for them when you did sell them. It was getting later in the evening when the meal was finished, and Bella pulled Dominic to his feet. We need to get going. They closed the gate in an hour, and Wiz lives outside the town walls on a farm. It's only a few minutes from the gate. We will make it there well before dark. The surprisingly muscular mystic gunner declared. All right, I'm with you. There is no need to panic. We're only a few minutes from the gates. Dominic agreed. They rushed through the crowded streets, earning amused glances from the locals, who assumed they were off to some shop or another before everything closed for the night. The village didn't keep lanterns lit during the evening, so other than a few taverns, The villagers mostly closed for business at dusk, using the closing of the gates as their last call for customers.